Welcome to Boring History Now, where we tell you stories so gentle and so slow, you'll forget halfway through why you started listening, possibly because you've drifted off into the soft folds of sleep. Tonight's episode: why medieval Japan trusted cats to predict rain. And just a fair warning, you probably won't make it through this day. If you enjoy this kind of slow wander through history, do that modern thing where you click like and subscribe, as if medieval farmers would have any idea what that meant. And while you're still awake enough to type, tell me where in the world you are right now and what time it is there. I always like imagining this strange invisible map of us tiny glowing dots scattered across the globe, all listening to the same slow story. Now, let's ease into tonight's journey. You are in Japan. The year is somewhere between 1400 and 1500. Though the exact date is fuzzy, partly because historians still argue over when certain customs started, and partly because medieval record-keeping often treated the other day as a legitimate time reference. You step into a village along the coast. The houses are built from wood and thatched with rice straw, the walls sliding open like polite secrets. The air smells faintly of the sea, though you haven't seen it yet. Instead, you hear the soft rustle of laundry drying in the spring breeze, kimonos swaying like sleepy flags. Somewhere nearby, someone is pounding rice in a mortar, a deep, rhythmic thud, like the heart of the town. The street beneath your feet is nothing more than packed dirt, scattered with tiny shells from when the tide was higher centuries ago. It's uneven enough to make you watch your step, though here, in the dreamlike pace of medieval life, no one minds if you walk a little slower. In fact, everyone does. You pass an old man crouched near his doorway, eyes fixed on something inside a woven basket. His hands are folded in the way of someone who is pretending to be patient, but you can feel the anticipation radiating from him. When you step closer, you see the basket is home to a cat. Not just any cat, this one has ears like little folded fans and a tail that curves in an elegant question mark. In this village, cats aren't merely pets. They are meteorologists, mood forecasters, and occasionally, self-appointed philosophers. People here believe a cat's behavior can predict the weather, especially rain. If the cat washes its face more than usual, or licks its paw and smooths its whiskers toward the sky, it means the clouds will gather. If the cat sits with its back to the wind, rain will come from the opposite direction. And if the cat disappears entirely, well, prepare for something dramatic. You crouch beside the man, who smiles in that careful way people do when they're not sure if you're in on the secret. "She's been washing her ear since morning," he says softly. "By nightfall, the rain will come." He says this with the confidence of someone announcing that the sun will set, yet with just enough humility to add, "Of course, sometimes she just has an itch." As you walk away, you glance up at the pale blue sky. It's so clear you can see the faint outline of the mountains in the distance, their slopes like folded paper. It's hard to believe rain could be on its way. But then, cats don't always bother with the obvious. Somewhere in the back of your mind, you store away this moment. A warm afternoon, a stranger's quiet certainty, and a cat who may or may not be a better weatherman than the local shrine keeper. You keep walking, the dirt road gently turning under your feet, and the sound of waves now growing a little closer. The scent of salt sharpens as you move downhill, the village slowly thinning into scattered homes and small vegetable plots. The air is warmer here, and you notice a cluster of children crouched around something in the grass. As you approach, they look up and wave an open, unhurried gesture, like they've been expecting you all day. In the center of their circle sits another cat. This one is white, with a splash of orange across its nose and a tail that sways lazily like a feather in a draft. The children are whispering about its every move, the way modern people might track the score of a baseball game. You catch fragments of their conversation. "Look, it's pouring, it's face rain tonight," one girl insists. A boy shakes his head. "No, that's just because the sun's too bright." They debate this with the earnest seriousness of scholars. It's oddly comforting to realize that some arguments about sports, weather, or the behavior of household pets have been happening for centuries and will likely never be resolved. You kneel beside them and ask what they're watching for. The girl, clearly the self-appointed leader, explains that if a cat washes behind its ears, it's not just predicting rain, it's inviting it. "The rain likes to follow cats," she says matter-of-factly, as though you should already know this. And here's the curious part. In medieval Japan, cats weren't originally kept for companionship. They were brought from China centuries earlier to protect valuable Buddhist scriptures from mice, but over time, their reputation expanded from library security guard to domestic weather prophet. In some regions, fishermen refused to set sail without consulting the village cats first. You imagine them, squatting on the docks, peering at cats for approval the way modern travelers check their phones for weather updates. The white cat yawns a slow, dramatic performance hand stretches before curling up again, tail neatly tucked over its nose. The children exchange glances. Sleeping like that means the rain will be heavy, the boy declares. The girl scoffs but doesn't argue. Sometimes, even the most devoted believers know when to let a prediction settle without further debate. You thank them and continue on your way. The road narrowing now into a path lined with tall grass. The sun has shifted lower, and the breeze carries the soft clatter of bamboo wind chimes from a nearby porch. Half hidden by a plum tree, you spot a small tea house. Its paper screens are open, revealing the dim interior where a lone man sits grinding tea leaves into a fine powder. He glances up and gestures for you to enter. Inside, the air smells of green tea and faint charcoal smoke. As you sit, he tells you about the old sayings that a cat facing north means rain from the south, and one facing south means rain from the north. But if the cat is facing east, he says with a sly smile, you should probably just stay home. You're not sure whether he's joking. He pours you a small cup, the liquid the color of jade, and sets it in front of you. Outside, a soft shadow passes across the sun. It could be a cloud, or maybe it's the cat's prediction beginning to unfold. You sip slowly, letting the warmth linger in your hands. Somewhere in the distance, you hear a faint meow, and whether you believe in these feline forecasts or not, you can't help but wonder if the rain really is on its way. You leave the tea house with the taste of green tea still warming your tongue, and the late afternoon light has shifted into that honey gold stage when the shadows grow long and the edges of everything feel softer, as though the day itself is starting to wind down. The air is cooler now, carrying the faint scent of rain, though it's hard to tell if it's real or just the suggestion planted by so many catwaters. The path dips into a stretch of farmland where rows of rice paddies shimmer like liquid mirrors. Farmers in wide-brimmed straw hats move slowly through the shallow water, their reflections bending with each careful step. The paddies are alive with the sound of frogs, an endless, overlapping chorus that somehow manages to be both lively and sleepy at the same time. Near the edge of the fields, you notice a woman crouched on a wooden platform, her hands busy weaving straw into sandals. At her side, a tabby cat is curled in the classic breadloaf position, paws tucked neatly beneath it. Eyes half closed, but alert in that cat-like way. You greet her, and she nods in a way that suggests she's not opposed to conversation, but she's also not going to stop what she's doing. She tells you she's making waraji sandals for her husband to wear into town. Then, without prompting, she glances at the cat. She's been loafing like that since noon. That means the rain will wait until tomorrow, she says. You ask if the prediction has ever been wrong, and she smiles. Of course. But so have the monks. There's a rhythm to her weaving, a soft rustle and twist that blends into the sounds of the field. She explains that in the rainy season, these sandals are made extra thick not because they last longer in the wet, but because the mud will cling to them anyway, making each step feel heavier. Better to accept it than fight it, she adds. A philosophy, you think, that applies far beyond footwear. In the distance, a boy runs along the edge of the paddies, chasing something you can't quite see. A kite, perhaps, or maybe just the satisfaction of running faster than his shadow. The tabby cat lifts its head to watch, then lowers it again, as if deciding the matter is beneath further attention. Historians still debate whether this deep association between cats and rain was more practical observation or charming superstition. But here, standing in the warm, damp air of the paddies, you can see how the two would be hard to separate. If your days depended on the moods of the sky, you might start reading omens in every twitch of a whisker, too. As you thank the woman and walk on, a dragonfly hovers briefly in front of you, its wings catching the last sunlight like slivers of glass. Somewhere nearby, a bamboo waterspout tips and empties with a hollow toke, marking the passing moments in a way no clock could. The road bends again, drawing you back toward the sea. The first sound of the shore reaches you before the sight, a soft, rhythmic hush, as though the ocean is breathing in its sleep. The path opens into a small fishing hamlet, where boats rest upside down on the sand like beached whales. their wooden hulls weathered into silvery gray. You pass a line of fishermen mending their nets, the coarse rope spread across their knees. One of them looks up and nods toward a dark shape stretched out along the boat's bow. Another cat, black this time, its fur gleaming faintly in the dimming light. It sprawled in perfect confidence, as though the entire boat was placed here purely for its comfort. The fisherman tells you this cat belongs to no one and everyone. We call him Kuro, he says simply. Kuro has a reputation. If he spends the day on shore, the weather will turn rough, and the fishermen will stay home. If he wanders down to the docks early in the morning, they take it as permission to sail. Today, Kuro is firmly on shore, paws draped over the side of the boat. Tomorrow will be a good day to repair nets, the fisherman says with a wry grin, as though this is both an inconvenience and an inevitability. You wander closer to the water, where the tide is low and the sand is patterned with the intricate spiraling trails of small crabs. A few children are building something elaborate near the shoreline, a miniature fortress of shells, driftwood, and pebbles. One girl explains, without looking up from her work, that it's a cat house for the rain. You ask what that means, and she shrugs. If the cats stay dry, the rain stays nice. A logic so circular, it's almost poetic. From somewhere behind you comes the faint metallic chime of a bell. Turning, you see a small shrine near the edge of the hamlet, its wooden steps worn smooth by years of bare feet. The bell is swaying gently in the breeze, though no one is near it. You climb the steps, the wood creaking softly under your weight. Inside, the shrine is lit by the warm glow of a single oil lamp. Offerings sit neatly at the base of a small statue, coins, dried fish, and, curiously, a small painted wooden cat. The attendant, an elderly woman in a faded indigo robe, tells you it's a manekaneko, a beckoning cat. For luck, she says, and sometimes for weather. She laughs softly at her own words, as though aware of how absurd they sound, yet unwilling to dismiss them. From the doorway, you watch the horizon. Clouds have begun to gather thin, grey ribbons unraveling across the pale sky. The breeze carries the cool scent of coming rain. Somewhere down the beach, Kuro yawns. It's hard to say whether the cats have been right all along, or whether people here simply notice the weather more because the cats tell them to. Either way, you find yourself watching the clouds with a little more expectation than before. The clouds drift slowly inland, pulling the light with them. By the time you leave the fishing hamlet, the world feels muted, as if wrapped in a blanket the size of the sky. The air smells richer, now sea salt mingling with the faint green scent of wet earth. Before it's even wet, the road inland narrows to a trail lined with low stone walls, beyond which small gardens sprawl in tidy rows, scallions, eggplants, and neat mounds of tea bushes. You pass an elderly man crouched between the plants, his knees tucked beneath him like folded paper. Black and white cat sits on the wall above him, tail curled around its paws. The man looks up, follows your gaze to the cat, and smiles faintly. She's been guarding the tea all afternoon, he says. You ask why the tea needs guarding, and he chuckles. Not from thieves, from the rain. He points to the leaves, explaining that if the cat curls tightly into a ball, rain will come before the leaves can be harvested. If she stays stretched out, the pickers have another day. The cat, apparently unbothered by this meteorological responsibility, yawns and blinks slowly at you. Somewhere in the hedges, a cricket begins its evening call steady, patient, and unwilling to stop for any human schedule. As you continue, you pass a small roadside stall selling pickled vegetables in ceramic jars. The woman behind the counter offers you a sample of pickled daikon, its sharp tang waking your tongue. She mentions, almost in passing, that her mother swore by watching the temple cats before hanging laundry something about the angle of their whiskers. You imagine the entire village quietly rearranging its day around the movements of a dozen indifferent felines. Historians still debate whether these customs grew from genuine observation or simply the human habit of finding patterns where they may not exist. But in places like this, where life is measured in seasons and harvests rather than minutes and seconds, the line between fact and gentle superstition feels comfortably blurry. The path winds into a grove of cedar trees, their tall trunks rising like pillars in a natural cathedral. The air here is cooler, the sound of the sea replaced by the soft whisper of leaves overhead. Ahead, a flicker of movement catches your eye. Cat, striped gray, slipping between the trees. It pauses, looks back at you with that inscrutable feline stare, and disappears deeper into the shadows. For reasons you can't quite name, you follow. The grove darkens quickly as you walk, the canopy filtering what's left of the afternoon light into a muted green glow. The ground is soft underfoot, blanketed in fallen needles. Somewhere in the distance, you hear the faint trickle of water. The striped cat reappears ahead, perched on a low branch, tail hanging down like a loose rope. It watches you approach, then leaps silently to the ground and pads off along a narrow side path. You hesitate. Following cats and stories never ends predictably, but then again, neither does ignoring them. The path leads to a small clearing where a stone basin sits beside a moss-covered shrine. The water in the basin is so still, it reflects the cat perfectly as it leans in to drink. The air smells faintly of damp stone and something floral, perhaps wild camellias growing unseen nearby. A man in a faded brown robe steps out from behind the shrine. He's carrying a bundle of firewood, but sets it down when he sees you. Without introduction, he says, "If she drinks like that, the rain will be gentle." You ask if the shrine is for the cat, and he laughs softly. No, for the rain itself, the cat is just on speaking terms with it. He tells you that in this region, there's an old belief. Rain that arrives after a cat drinks from shrine water is considered a blessing, especially for rice planting. It's said the rain will soak the earth, just enough, not too much, not too little. You glance at the cat, who now sits licking her paw, as if to dismiss the entire conversation. The man offers you a seat on a low wooden bench beside the shrine. You rest there, listening to the faint tapping of cedar needles falling onto the basin's surface. Time stretches in that peculiar way it does when nothing demands your attention. When you finally rise to leave, the man nods toward the path. "Follow the stream," he says. "It will take you to the old bridge, and maybe another cat." As you step back into the grove, you realize the first drops of rain are falling so light, they feel more like whispers against your skin. Somewhere ahead, you hear the stream, steady and sure. The stream reveals itself, slowly, a narrow ribbon of clear water winding between mossy stones. Its voice a constant, calming murmur. You walk along its bank, the earth soft and springy underfoot. The rain still so fine it's barely more than a suggestion. Here, the air smells of wet cedar and something faintly metallic, like the inside of a well. The trees part to reveal the old bridge the man had mentioned. It's a simple wooden structure, its railings worn smooth by centuries of hands, each touch leaving a whisper of oil in the grain. A thin mist clings to the water below, where it pools deep and dark before slipping away downstream. Halfway across the bridge, you notice a small bundle near one of the posts. It's a folded piece of cloth-faded indigo, tied neatly with a bit of straw. Perched on top of it, in the most unbothered manner imaginable, is another cat. This one is long-haired, pale as cream, with the sort of expression that says it has already weighed your worth and filed the result away under acceptable. An old man appears at the far end of the bridge, carrying a basket covered with a reed mat. He explains, as if you'd asked, that the cloth is a tenugri, placed there as an offering, not for the cat exactly, but for the rain spirit the cat is believed to speak to. If the cat accepts the cloth, he says, the rain will be short and the roads passable. You ask, what happens if the cat doesn't accept? And he shrugs. Then we wait, and we walk carefully. The cat blinks at you, slow and deliberate, before curling into a ball atop the offering. The old man smiles. "A good sign," he says, and continues on his way. You linger on the bridge for a while, watching the ripples in the water below. It's easy to imagine how, in a world without satellite forecasts or radar maps, people would look for meaning in such small, repeatable moments. The shift of a cat's tail, the way it curls its paws, the direction it faces in the rain. Patterns become comfort. Comfort becomes tradition. A faint rumble of thunder rolls across the hills, not sharp, but distant, like someone moving heavy furniture in the sky. You keep walking. The stream eventually leads you to a small hamlet nestled against the hillside. Here, the houses seem to huddle together, as though they know something you don't, perhaps about the weather, perhaps about visitors. Smoke curls lazily from a few chimneys, carrying the smell of miso and grilled fish. At the entrance to the hamlet, you're greeted by an odd sight. A group of villagers gathered around a raised wooden platform, watching with intense interest as a calico cat walks in deliberate circles. One of the women explains that this is a weather circle. If the cat walks clockwise, they expect the rain to pass quickly. Counterclockwise, it will linger. You stand with them as the cat completes her third clockwise lap. The woman nods in satisfaction. Good. The rain will be done by morning. You ask whether the cat has ever been wrong. She tilts her head, thinking, once, she says, but she was pregnant then. We decided it didn't count. Someone offers you a place under the eaves, and you sit with the group as the drizzle thickens just enough to drum softly on the wooden roof. The conversation meanders in that pleasant, unhurried way small-town talk does. Whose son is helping to repair the shrine roof? Which rice field flooded last season? The strange bird seen near the river. Between stories, they share a tidbit you hadn't heard yet, that in the Edo period, some merchants in Kyoto kept cats not just for pest control, but to predict whether it was safe to display delicate goods outdoors. Silk, paper, and lacquer don't take kindly to sudden showers, so a cat's preening habits could be the difference between profit and loss. One man laughs, adding, and of course, if the cat sat on the merchandise, it was a sign you'd sold enough for the day. The rain begins to lighten, and the calico cat hops down from her platform, shaking each paw with theatrical care before strolling away. The villagers take this as a cue to disperse, each returning to their own quiet routines. You rise too, stepping back onto the muddy path. The hills ahead are half shrouded in mist now, their outlines soft as watercolor. Somewhere behind you, a bell rings, slow and deliberate, each chime fading into the next. The road bends upward, carrying you toward higher ground, and perhaps another cat. The climb is gentle at first, the path winding between terraces of rice paddies that catch the mist like bowls catching steam. The rain has stopped entirely now, leaving a fresh gloss over everything: the stones underfoot, the leaves overhead, even the rough bark of the cedar trees that line the edge of the path. Somewhere far below, you can still hear the stream, its voice softer now with distance. Halfway up the hill, you pass a lone traveler coming down. He carries a bundle wrapped in cloth and a walking stick polished smooth by years of use. He nods in greeting, then pauses to say, if you see the temple cat, ask her about the rain next week. You're about to ask what temple, but he's already moved on, as if he'd only stepped into your path long enough to plant a riddle and disappear. At the crest of the hill, you find it's the temple. It's smaller than you expected, almost shy in its design. Wooden beams darkened with age hold up a sweeping tiled roof, and a line of stone lanterns leads to the entrance like a trail of quiet centuries. The scent of incense lingers in the air, mingling with the faint dampness of rain-soaked wood. Near the entrance sits the cat in question, an enormous, dignified tortoiseshell whose fur looks as though it's been brushed by an artist's hand. She reclines on the temple steps with an expression that suggests she is both guardian and goddess here. A monk emerges from within, his sandals whispering against the floorboards. He bows slightly and tells you the cat's name is Tama. She has lived here for 13 years, he says, and in that time, her predictions have been, let's say, respected. You ask how Tama makes her predictions, and the monk explains it simply. If she sits in the sun, the weather will hold. If she hides under the veranda, rain is coming. But, he adds with a faint smile, sometimes she hides simply because she doesn't wish to be seen. We call that the Tama margin of error. The cat regards you without blinking, then rolls to her side, stretching one paw into the air before curling back into herself. The monk nods, as if this means something definitive. You nod too, just in case. As you step away, you can't shake the feeling that Tama has seen the weather for the next decade and simply chooses not to share. Beyond the temple, the path narrows again, curling into the forest like a ribbon disappearing into a drawer. The air here is cooler, the scent of wet leaves and soil richer, almost edible. A low mist clings to the ground, swirling slightly around your ankles as you walk. It's here you come upon a small wayside tea stand, no more than a wooden counter under a patched awning. An elderly woman sits behind it, a kettle steaming beside her. She beckons you closer and pours a cup without asking. The tea is pale and fragrant, and you feel it spread warmth through your fingers before you even drink. She asks if you've come for the rain cattails. You admit you're not entirely sure, but it seems possible. She chuckles softly and begins to tell you about a time, many years ago, when a traveling merchant ignored the warning of a cat who had been obsessively grooming its tail. That night, she says, the rain came so suddenly it washed half his wares into the river. By morning, the cat was dry again, sitting by the road as if nothing had happened. As you sip, She shares another tidbit. In some mountain villages, people used to watch cats' pupils to judge the weather. Narrow pupils meant bright, dry days ahead. Wide pupils suggested cloud cover or rain. You glance at the cat stretched out beside her stand, its eyes half closed in the universal expression of, "I could not care less." Historians still debate whether these observations were based on genuine patterns. Pupil dilation does change with light, or whether they were simply one more charming way to fold animals into the rhythm of daily life. Here, as steam curls from your cup into the cool air, it's hard to imagine anyone caring about the distinction. The woman refuses payment for the tea. "The cat has already charged you," she says, and nods toward the feline, who now sits with its back to you, staring into the forest as though it has already predicted your next step. You thank her, step back onto the path, and follow the curve into the deepening green. Somewhere ahead, a bell tolls a single note, fading into silence. The path curves gently uphill, and soon the forest thins, replaced by a hillside dotted with terraces of tea shrubs and plum trees just beginning to bloom. The petals float lazily in the damp air, clinging to your sleeves and the tips of your hair before falling to the ground like tiny, resigned parachutes. At the edge of one terrace sits a small wooden hut with an open doorway. Inside, a man in his 50s sits cross-legged, carving the handle of a wooden ladle. Beside him, on a neatly folded blanket, rests a ginger cat with the unbothered serenity of a being who knows the entire hillside is hers. The man greets you warmly, then explains that this is Meekan, named for her orange fur. "She's our best forecaster," he says, gesturing at the cat with the tip of his carving knife. "When she curls up on the north side of the hut, we expect a drizzle. If she chooses the south side, we prepare for wind-driven rain. And if she disappears entirely, we don't leave the hill." You ask if Meekan is ever wrong. He nods solemnly. "Of course, but when she's wrong, we simply assume the weather has changed its mind. It's easier that way." You settle onto the low threshold, listening to the occasional snip of his carving and the soft rustle of leaves as the breeze moves through the plum trees. The air is cooler up here, the scent of damp earth mixing with the faint sweetness of blossoms. The man tells you that centuries ago, some villages even held small festivals in honor of their most accurate cats, offering them bowls of fish and scraps of silk ribbon. "I can't say whether the cats cared," he adds, "but the people certainly did." Meekan stretches, blinks once at you, and relocates to the north side of the hut. The man nods as if this settles the matter of tomorrow's weather entirely. You take your leave, following a narrow trail that winds along the ridge. Below, the mist still curls in the valleys like white ink poured into water. The ridge path leads you to a village smaller than any you've seen so far, just a handful of houses, a communal well, and a storehouse with walls of thick plaster. Here, the rain customs are a little different. Near the well, you spot two women kneeling beside a striped cat. One of them is gently tapping the cat's ears with a slender stick, while the other watches closely. You must look puzzled, because the older woman explains. "If the cat flattens its ears during this, the rain will come before sunset. If it ignores us, the sky will hold." You ask whether the cat enjoys this role. The younger woman grins. She tolerates it, especially when we give her dried sardines afterward. A boy nearby chimes in, telling you about an old story from his grandfather that during the Muromachi period, samurai traveling through the mountains would sometimes carry a cat with them to predict storms. "They said it was like carrying a piece of the weather in your sleeve," he says proudly. In the center of the village, a communal notice board displays drawings of cats in various poses, sitting, washing, curling, stretching each, with a small note about the weather it supposedly predicts. The sketches are surprisingly detailed, as if the artist has spent more time watching cats than anything else. Historians still debate whether such boards ever existed in larger towns, or if this is a purely local tradition. You imagine the scenes centuries ago: merchants, farmers, and travelers all gathered to check the cat report before deciding whether to set out for the day. As you leave, the striped cat hops onto a low wall and watches you go, her tail flicking lazily. The women wave, calling after you that you should expect nothing more than a soft evening drizzle. The path beyond dips back toward the forest, where the smell of rain feels stronger again. Somewhere in the distance, you hear the low, familiar mewl of yet another unseen cat. The forest welcomes you back like an old acquaintance, the canopy folding overhead until the sky is just a pale, shifting hint through the leaves. The air is warmer here, the damp earth releasing a deep, almost sweet smell that seems to settle into your clothes. Raindrops from earlier showers fall in slow, random intervals from the branches above, tapping against your shoulders as if to remind you they're still here. A narrow wooden bridge crosses a shallow ravine ahead, the water below running quick and clear over smooth stones. Sitting right in the middle of the bridge, as though it has signed a lease, is a sleek black cat. Its coat is so dark it seems to absorb the dim light, and only its pale yellow eyes mark its shape. You pause at one end of the bridge, wondering whether the cat will move. It doesn't. Instead, it begins grooming its side with meticulous attention, pausing every few licks to glance at the water below. From the far bank, a man appears, his arms full of firewood. "Ah," he calls. "You've met the bridgekeeper." He explains that locals call this cat cage, or shadow, and believe it only sits on the bridge when rain will fall before night. If she's not here, the day will stay dry. But if she sits, well, you'd better have your sandals ready. You ask if Cage is ever wrong, and he smiles. The cat isn't wrong. Sometimes the people are impatient. Cage finally rises, stretches long enough to seem mildly theatrical, and steps aside, allowing you passage. As you cross, the man points out that the ravine's water is already running higher than usual. The cats always know first, he says. On the other side, the path turns into a gentle slope downward. You notice fresh paw prints in the damp earth, as though Cage has gone ahead of you or perhaps gone ahead of the weather itself. The slope leads to a clearing where an inn stands 2 stories, its roof thick with fresh thatch, smoke curling from a small chimney. A low wooden sign swings in the breeze, painted with a cat's face so stylized it's almost a cloud. Inside, the inn is warm, the air thick with the scent of simmering broth and grilled fish. You remove your sandals and step onto the polished floor, greeted by the innkeeper, round-faced woman whose hair is streaked with silver. At her feet, a plump tabby lounges on a woven mat, tail flicking lazily. "This is Maru," the innkeeper says. She keeps the rooms warm and the guests informed. You raise an eyebrow, and she laughs. If Maru sleeps by the fire all day, we expect heavy rain. If she spends her time near the door, the weather will be fair. Tonight, she's been in the kitchen, which usually means a short shower, then clearing skies. You glance at Maru, who offers no confirmation, merely adjusting her position to take up more of the mat. Over dinner, steaming rice, pickled vegetables, and a bowl of miso you listen as the innkeeper shares a final tidbit. Some older sailors believed cats could not only predict storms, but calm them, provided they were spoken to kindly. It doesn't always work on the sea, she admits, but it works on people. The rain begins again while you eat, a soft patter against the shutters, not enough to blur the lamplight, but enough to make the world outside seem farther away. Maru stretches pads over to the doorway and sits, staring into the wet night as though waiting for the exact moment it will stop. You finish your meal slowly, feeling the quiet settle into your bones. By the time you step outside again, the rain has already eased, leaving the air fresh and cool. The tabby's prediction, it seems, was correct. Somewhere down the road, a cat-shaped shadow slips between the lantern-lit doorways, as if guiding you toward the story's end. The road from the inn is nearly silent now, save for the faint crunch of damp gravel beneath your feet and the occasional distant drip from a branch that hasn't yet let go of its rainwater. Lanterns swing gently from low posts along the path, their paper shades glowing warm against the cool night air. You follow the road until it opens into a small square bordered by a shrine, a tea shop, and a row of houses with paper screens drawn closed. In the center of the square sits a low stone platform, and on it course a cat. This one is pure white, so still it might be mistaken for a carving, if not for the slow movement of its breath. An old man sits nearby, hunched slightly, sipping tea from a cup without a handle. He tells you the cat is called Shiro, and that she appears in the square only when the weather is settling itself, not improving or worsening, just deciding. When she stays for more than an hour, he says, it means tomorrow will be the kind of day you forget to notice the sky, which is sometimes the best kind. You sit beside him for a while, watching Shiro do nothing at all. The air feels balanced, neither heavy with rain nor restless with wind, just quiet. Eventually, Shiro stands, stretches with the elegance only cats seem to possess, and walks unhurriedly toward the shrine. She disappears into the shadows, leaving only the memory of her presence and the faint sound of her paws on stone. The old man drains the last of his tea, sets the cup down, and says simply, "That's all for tonight." You realize he might be speaking not just of the weather, but of the story itself. The air is soft tonight, like the sort of fabric you'd buy without checking the price tag and regret later, but not enough to return. You're standing in a meadow that refuses to be harried. Its grass is long and lazy, tilting in a breeze that moves like it has nowhere else to be. The sky is a pale wash of gold and greenish blue, the kind of color you'd expect from an artist who's been quietly overwatering their paints. A thin hum rises, not quite music, not quite silence. Bees, dozens of them, drift in slow spirals, the kind of slow you envy. The land smells faintly of crushed thyme and warm earth. Somewhere nearby, a stream is pretending to be more important than it is, making a big show of running over stones. You take a step, and the world feels like it folds around you, like walking into a memory you don't remember making. You probably won't make it through this day, but that's fine. This is a day designed to be lived in slow motion. A figure moves ahead of Uber feet against the soil, toes stained green. Her dress is the pale yellow of beeswax left in sunlight, frayed at the edges as if the wind itself had been nibbling. Her hair is tangled with petals and something that might be pollen. You get the sense she didn't put them there herself. This is Kalianera, the nymph, who, according to the old stories, once bargained with bees for eternal spring, a tricky thing to negotiate, since bees are famously better at economics than most city-states. Historical fact: in certain regions of ancient Greece, honey was so valued it was used to pay taxes. Imagine explaining that to your landlord. The nymph doesn't greet you at first. She bends low to the grass, watching something you can't see. A bee lands on her wrist, and instead of shooing it away, she tilts her head toward it, listening, as though it's buzzing as a language. Maybe it is. Some say this happened in Arcadia, others insist it was near Mount Hymettus, famous for its honey. Historians still debate whether her eternal spring was meant literally, or if it was just poetic shorthand for mild winters and slightly smug weather. Either way, the bees here seem unusually confident, almost smug themselves. You walk closer, hearing the low, even pitch of their wings. She glances up at you, her eyes the color of rain-damp moss, and smiles as though she knows you've been standing there longer than you thought. "Come," she says softly, like it's an afterthought. They're almost ready to speak. "Now, let's ease into tonight's journey." The meadow narrows into a path, but it's less a road and more a polite suggestion from the grass. Bees drift ahead like lazy guides, sometimes darting away as though remembering they have more important errands. You follow Kalianera, who moves without disturbing so much as a blade of grass. An unfair skill, considering your own steps sound like you're trying to step on every crunchy leaf in existence. The light shifts. It's not sunset exactly, more like the sun's paused, deciding if it's worth the trouble to go down. The air is warmer here, thick with the smell of something sweet and unnameable. "Long ago," she begins, "the bees kept their own calendar, not the human one. Ours is a mess. All festivals and debt payments. Theirs was simple. Blooming days, sleeping days." She brushes her fingers through the tall flowers at her side. Tiny blue petals stick to her skin. But the blooming days began to shorten. They called it the shrinking season. No one listened. Not the shepherds, not the kings. So they came to me. A bee hovers near your ear, buzzing with the steady patience of someone waiting in a bakery line. You resist the urge to swat. Obscure fact: in some rural Greek villages, people once believed bees carried the souls of the dead to the afterlife. If you were very quiet, you could whisper a message to one and trust it would be delivered. You wondered briefly what would happen if you sent a bee to complain about taxes. They wanted, Kalianera says, to keep the flowers forever, to banish the frost. They promised me honey sweeter than the first light of day, and the hum of their wings in my sleep. She pauses, looking at you Sapilong. I asked what they wanted in return. They said time. The word seems heavier in her mouth than in yours. There's a stretch of silence. The path widens into a clearing where the grass sways in perfect rhythm, as though moved by invisible hands. Bees gather here in a loose spiral, circling upward like slow smoke. Historians still argue whether time in these old stories meant years of life, or something stranger, memory perhaps, or the first hour after waking when the world hasn't yet decided what kind of day it will be. Kalianera steps into the spiral. The bees part for her like she's water in a dry place. She turns to you. You can watch, but if you speak, they will take something from you. Her tone isn't threatening, more like warning you about a slightly grumpy shopkeeper. You stand still. The bee's hum deepens, and the air shivers around you. The scent of honey blooms so strongly it's almost visible, golden and slow. Somewhere in the distance, a bird calls once and falls silent, as if remembering it's past bedtime. The spiral of bees thickens, the air growing dense with their movement. You watch them drift closer to Kalianera, their wings catching the strange not quite sunset light. She stands utterly still, except for the slow rise and fall of her breath, as if she too has become part of their geometry. The hum is no longer a hum, it's a layered sound, somewhere between wind in a hollow reed and the first awkward notes of an orchestra tuning up. Your eyelids grow heavy, not from sleep exactly, but from the odd sensation that blinking might make you miss something. They speak without words. Kalianera murmurs. It's the pattern, the weight of their wings in the air, the way they circle. You squint, and you can almost see it. Faint shapes forming in the spiral, like letters in an alphabet that was abandoned centuries ago. Major fact for you to file away. Ancient beekeepers in Greece sometimes played music to their hives, believing the rhythm would make the bees more cooperative. Flutes were especially common, though one account claims a lyre player once charmed an entire swarm into following him home. An early example of free delivery service. A bee breaks from the spiral and hovers directly in front of your face, close enough that you can see the fine golden hairs on its body. It tilts in the air, as if measuring you. You resist the urge to nod politely. They offer again, Kalianera says, eyes still closed. Eternal spring, flowers forever. But the trade has changed. They ask for the silence between storms. You're fairly certain that's not something you keep lying around. Historians still debate whether such a bargain could be literal, she adds in a distracted tone. Some think it's only poetry for a long stretch of peace. Others aren't sure peace is ever so easy to hold. The spiral loosens. Bees drift down onto her shoulders, into her hair, along her bare arms. They are perfectly calm. You've been stung before once while trying to rescue a bee from a puddle, which it did not appreciate, but there's no sense of danger here. She opens her eyes. They want an answer tonight. The meadow feels suddenly quieter, though the bees are still moving. Even the air seems to pause, leaning in to hear what she say. Kalianera steps from the spiral, the bees following like a slow, shimmering cloak. Walk with me, she says. They like to think negotiations improve with movement, and so you do back onto the narrow, polite path, with the bees drifting just ahead. The path turns toward a small rise, where the grass thins and the earth grows sandy. Your footsteps crunch, a sound you're acutely aware of in the stillness. The bees, by contrast, move without any hint of hurry. From the top of the rise, you can see the meadow stretch into a patchwork of flowers and low shrubs. A thin line of dark trees marks the far edge, and beyond them, hazy hills roll away into a muted horizon. The light here never seems to change, still caught in that strange pause before sunset, as though the sun itself is unwilling to conclude the day. They know, Kalianera says suddenly, that humans measure life by endings, seasons, years, rains. They find it odd. Do bees measure by beginnings? You ask before you can stop yourself. She tilts her head. They measure by what's in bloom, what is open to them. Time is only an opening or a closing. Nothing else matters. Obscure tidbit. In some older folk tales, bees were said to die if they ever heard a lie. It's a charming thought until you imagine what would happen if you told one you'd just be a minute. Kalianera sits on a flat stone, patting the space beside her. The bees settle round her feet in a slow, living carpet. They'll give the spring, she says. But they want something sweeter than silence. They want the space between your thoughts. The empty room where nothing yet lives. You picture it an inner chamber that's yours alone. The place you go when you're staring at clouds or forgetting why you walked into a room. And the idea of handing it over makes you feel oddly exposed, like standing barefoot on cold marble. Historians still argue whether such a thing could even be taken. Some believe it's only a metaphor for devotion, a way of saying you'll never turn your mind away from the bargain. Others, perhaps more superstitious, think the bees could make it literal, filling every corner of your mind with their hum. So there is no space left for emptiness. The hum swells, though you see no change in the bees' movement. It's inside your chest now, a resonance more felt than heard. They want to know, Kalianera says quietly, if you think it's worth it. You're not sure if she's asking for herself or for them, and you're not sure if you're allowed to answer yet. Below, the meadow waits, impossibly green, impossibly still. The bees hover, their bodies bright against the dimming air. You don't answer right away, not because you're clever, but because the air here seems designed to slow your tongue. Kalyanira doesn't press. She sits like the stone beneath her, hands resting loosely in her lap. Bees grazing her skin as if they're tasting the question themselves. A gust of wind moves over the hill, cool and scented faintly with pine. It's the first breeze you've felt in what could be hours or minutes. Time here is already beginning to fray, threads slipping loose from the usual weave. They're patient, she says, but patience is not the same as waiting. Bees don't wait, they move, they make, they turn the air to gold. From this height, you notice something you missed before. The meadow's flowers seem arranged in loose, concentric patterns. Not perfect circles, but curved lines, like ripples in a pond. Maybe it's just the wind, or maybe it's the bees' quiet cartography. Major fact, archaeological evidence shows that in ancient Greece, some hives were made of woven wicker and clay, shaped like small domes you could lift and carry. The design was practical, but also strangely beautiful, like something you'd keep in the corner of your garden just to admire. Kalyanira rises, dusting off her skirt with a motion that sends 3 bees drifting lazily into the air. They say the offer will close when the moon crosses the rim of the meadow. If we're to decide, we walk. You fall into step beside her. The slope is gentle, the grass warm against your ankles. Somewhere, in the distance, a cicada begins its slow, rattling song, a reminder that other creatures measure time differently too. Historians still debate whether this was truly a bargain, or simply a way to explain a season that lasted unusually long, 1 year, she says, almost absently. But they don't see the patterns. They don't hear the hum. The bees drift ahead, forming a loose path. You notice one flower along the way, small, pale, and trembling in the breeze. That's different from the others. Its petals are freckled with tiny golden dots, like drops of honey frozen mid-fall. You're not sure why, but you feel as though it's watching you pass. Don't pick it, she murmurs without looking back. It's a marker. They'll know if it's gone. You keep walking, the sound of your footsteps muffled now, as if the ground itself is trying to hush you. The path curves, and you find yourself back among taller flowers. Their colors are deeper here, plum, crimson, gold, and the air hums, not just with bees, but with the slow pulse of late afternoon, or whatever passes for late afternoon in a place that refuses to end the day. Kalyanira stops beside a cluster of wild thyme, crouching low to press her fingers into the soil. Still warm, she says softly. That's good. You're about to ask why when she adds, the bees say the ground keeps its own memory. It remembers every root, every seed, every frost. They listen to it before they listen to me. Obscure tidbit. There was once a belief in certain Greek villages that you had to tell the bees when a member of your household died, or they would abandon the hive. Some people draped black cloth over the hives, as if bees needed mourning clothes to understand grief. They're wondering, she says after a moment, if you understand the cost. Not in words, words aren't enough. They want to feel it in you. It's not a comfortable thing, being appraised by creatures you can't quite read. The bees gather in small groups now, landing on the thyme, moving in slow arcs around your head. You feel the faint push of their wing beats on your skin. Historians still puzzle over how these ancient stories describe the bees. Judgment. Some think it meant watching how still you could stand without flinching. Others believe it was about the rhythm of your breathing, as though the bees could detect the truth in it. Kalyanira straightens, brushing soil from her fingertips. They've decided you may come to the center. You don't ask what the center is. Somehow, you know. She leads you deeper into the meadow. The hum grows, layer upon layer, until it feels like it's inside your ribs. And there, just ahead, you see it, a low ring of stones, half covered in moss, with flowers blooming in a perfect circle inside. The bees move in and out of the ring, as if it's a doorway. Kalyanira steps over the stones without hesitation, then turns to you, crossed gently. She says, they'll be listening. You step over the stones, careful not to brush against them, though you can't explain why that feels so important. The air changes immediately thicker, warmer, with a sweetness that almost sticks to your skin. It's not just honey you smell now, but something older. Sun-warmed resin, crushed petals, the faint metallic tang of rain that hasn't fallen yet. The flowers inside the ring are different from those outside. Their stems are straighter, their petals brighter, and none seem touched by the tiny blemishes or folds you'd expect. It's like stepping into the idea of a meadow rather than the meadow itself. Kalianera moves to the center and kneels, the bees shifting around her in soft, spiraling waves. She places her hands flat on the earth, eyes closed, and the hum deepens until you feel it in your teeth. They want you to stand there, she says without opening her eyes, nodding toward a small patch of bare soil opposite her. You move slowly, each step deliberate. The bees don't scatter, they adjust, a living tide parting just enough for you to pass. Major fact, in ancient Greek religion, there were priestesses called meliciolatorily, bees who served in temples dedicated to goddesses like Demeter and Artemis. They were believed to speak the will of the divine. In the same way bees carried the will of the seasons. Kalianera begins speaking, but the words are too soft for you to catch. The bees react, tilting in the air as though her voice changes the current. Then her eyes open, fixed on you. They will give the spring. They will keep it, endless and green, with blooms for every day you will ever see. But you must let them take the hollow place in your mind, the one where nothing waits. It will belong to them. Historians still debate whether this hollow place was metaphorical and inner stillness or an actual, tangible loss. Some accounts suggest people who bargained with the bees became incapable of boredom, because their thoughts were always filled with the hum. Others call that a blessing. A bee lands on your hand. You don't move. It stands there, its tiny body vibrating with the hum, as if it's reminding you of the choice. Kalianera watches you closely. They will not ask twice. The hum has become something like a heartbeat, not yours, not hers, but the meadows. The flowers seem to sway in time with it, and the light has shifted again, now a richer gold that pools on the petals like liquid. You look at Kalianera, then at the bees, then at the ring of stones holding this perfect green world together. It's impossible to tell whether this is a test or an invitation. She speaks again, her tone as calm as before. If you say yes, you will not notice the taking. One day you will simply realize the silence is gone. If you say no, the season will turn. The frost will come. Obscure tidbit. In some fragments of lost pastoral poetry, bees are said to store sunlight in jars, a turn of phrase that scholars still argue about. Most agree it's just a poetic description of honey, though a few less practical suggests it might hint at an old belief in literal bottled light. The bee on your hand shifts, its wings brushing your skin in a way that feels almost questioning. You realize that your answer is already forming, not in your mouth but somewhere deeper, where language doesn't quite reach. Historians still can't agree whether the bargains in these myths were made for personal gain or for the sake of the land itself. Some believe the nymphs acted as mediators for villagers desperate for longer growing seasons. Others think the stories are just allegories for careful stewardship of nature. Kalianera tilts her head, studying your face. It's not about forever, she says. It's about what you are willing to give, knowing you can't get it back. The hum dips low, like the pause before a final note in a song. Even the wind stills. Somewhere, beyond the ring, the first star has appeared in the not-quite night sky, and you understand, the moon is rising. The rim of the meadow is not far from being crossed. They are listening, she says, and so am I. You draw in a slow breath, tasting the air sweet, warm, with that faint edge of something wild. Kalianera doesn't rush you. The bees don't rush you. Only the moon, silver and quiet, continues its climb over the meadow's rim. Your voice feels too heavy to use, so you nod. It's a small gesture, but somehow the hum reacts instantly, swelling like a tide catching the moon's pull. The bee on your hand rises, circles once, and drifts away into the spiral. Kalianera closes her eyes again. It's done. There's no dramatic flash, no crack of thunder, no chorus of grateful flowers, just a subtle shift, like the meadow exhaling. The hum settles into a steady low tone, the sound of something vast returning to its work. Major fact, in ancient Thessaly, farmers left offerings of honey at the first thaw of spring, hoping to ensure a good harvest. Not grain, not wine honey, as though sweetness itself could bribe the earth into kindness. You wait for some sign that you've changed, but there's only the strange calm of the moment, as though the world has been quietly adjusted and you're the last to realize it. Kalianera rises and steps out of the ring. She gestures for you to follow, and when you do, the bees part again, making space like courteous hosts. They will keep their promise, she says, as you cross back over the stones. You'll notice in small ways. The buds will open sooner, the blossoms will hold longer, the air will always have a little more green in it. Historians still debate whether eternal spring in these stories was truly eternal, or simply long enough to feel endless to those who lived it. No record survives of what happened generations later, when the first frost inevitably returned. As you walk away from the ring, you feel a faint emptiness at the back of your mind. No, not emptiness, more like a quiet room you can't seem to enter anymore. The bees have taken it, though you can't feel the taking, only the absence. Kalianira glances at you, a wry tilt to her mouth. They like you, she says. That doesn't happen often. The path from the ring feels longer than the one you took to reach it, not because of distance, but because everything seems slightly altered. The flowers' colors are richer now, the scents more layered honey, blending with thyme, with mint, with something sharp and resinous that wasn't there before. The bees keep pace with you, some darting ahead, others floating at shoulder height, as though curious about your face. It's a strange kind of company, silent, save for the hum, yet somehow attentive. Kalianira walks with her hands behind her back, her steps unhurried. They'll want you to visit again, she says. You've given them a part of yourself. It makes them fond. Obscure tidbit. In certain old folk charms, a single bee was kept in a lidded jar beneath the bed to bring prophetic dreams. The idea was that the bee would carry visions into your sleep, just as it carried pollen to flowers. Whether this worked is, unsurprisingly, unverified. The ground begins to slope downward, leading toward a patch of shadow at the meadow's far edge. The air cools slightly, carrying the damp, mossy scent of the trees ahead. Historians still puzzle over the role nymphs played in such stories. Were they literal beings, divine and immortal, or personifications of the land itself? In this moment, watching Kalianira's hair catch the last gold of the light, it's difficult to imagine her as anything other than entirely real. You'll notice dreams, she says after a while, as though continuing an earlier conversation. The kind that feel like you're walking in two places at once. Don't be afraid of them. They're only checking in. You think about the quiet room in your mind, the one now gone, and wonder if the bees will use it to store these dreams, keeping them like jars on a shelf. Ahead, the meadow thins into a wide band of short grass. Beyond it, the trees stand in a neat, improbable row, as though they were planted by a gardener with a ruler and too much time. The shadows between them look like doorways. Kalianira slows, glancing toward the dark line. They'll see us to the edge, she says. After that, it's up to you. The last stretch of meadow feels almost ceremonial. The bees form a drifting corridor on either side of you, their hum low and even. Like a chant, no one has to practice anymore. Kalianira walks a step ahead, her hands brushing the tops of the shorter grasses. You notice she doesn't look back, as though she already knows you'll follow. The air is cooler here, and the golden light has softened into something more like candlelight, still warm, but flickering faintly, as if the day is beginning to notice it's overstayed its welcome. They'll remember you now, she says, not quite meeting your eye, in the way they remember which flowers close at dusk, or which streams dry in summer. You've joined their map. Major fact. In the ruins of ancient Ephesus, archaeologists found small ceramic tokens stamped with the image of a bee. These were thought to be badges of the priestesses or symbols of citizenship. Proof that the bee was more than just an insect hit was a mark of belonging. The trees loom closer, their trunks dark and smooth. The neatness of their row feels unnatural, but not unfriendly. You half expect them to bow as you approach. Kalianira stops just short of the first shadow. Beyond here, she says, is where their influence fades. The season they will still turn. You glance back over your shoulder at the meadow. From this angle, it looks like a shallow bowl, the flowers inside glowing faintly. The bees are still moving, still keeping their patterns, but you realize you can't hear their hum as clearly anymore. Historians still argue over whether these edges were meant to be literal boundaries, or just the limits of belief places where the old bargains lost their power. Whatever the truth, there is a distinct sense of stepping away from something alive. She tilts her head toward the dark between the trees. You can leave, or you can linger and learn more of their ways. But if you linger, you'll carry more than you've already given. You're not sure if that's a warning or an invitation. You take one step into the shadow, then another. The air changes instantly cooler, sharper, with the faint smell of damp stone. Behind you, the meadow remains lit in its endless twilight, as if it belongs to a different world entirely. Kalyanera follows, her bare feet silent on the dark earth. The trees here are tall enough to make the space between them feel like a hallway, and you walk it with the same instinctive hush you'd use in a cathedral. They're still watching, she says. They can follow this far, though not in the same numbers. Sure enough, a few bees drift along at your side, their golden bodies catching stray bits of light filtering through the canopy. Obscure tidbit: in some rural traditions, if a bee followed you away from its hive, you were meant to speak to it softly, telling it where you lived, so it could visit and bring you news. The idea that bees might carry gossip is oddly believable. The path narrows, twisting between the tree roots. You have the sense that this isn't a place people walk often, yet it feels worn like water has been flowing here for centuries, smoothing the way. Historians still puzzle over why so many bee myths involve thresholds, doorways, borders, lines between one kind of place and another. Some think it's because bees themselves cross worlds constantly, between the domestic space of the hive and the wild space of the flowers. Kalyanera pauses at a bend where the trees part slightly, letting in a beam of pale light. They call this the remembering place, she says. It's where they keep the shape of every bargain they've made. You look around, but see no signs of hives, no carved stones, no scrolls, only moss, soft and deep underfoot. They don't need to write it down, she says with a faint smile. They carry it. A bee passes close to your ear, and you catch a flicker of something, not a sound, not a word exactly, but the feeling of standing in the meadow's center again. The ring of stones, the hum. They're showing you, Kalyanera says, so you won't forget what you've given. The beam of light shifts as a breeze stirs the canopy, and for a moment, the moss beneath your feet glows faintly, as if remembering the sun. You stand very still, letting the echo of the meadow's hum fade from your ribs. Kalyanera crushes, brushing her fingers through the moss. They mark the bargains here, she says, not in lines or symbols, but in scent. You can't see it, but they can trace it, the way you'd follow ink on paper. Major fact: the ancient Greeks sometimes trained bees to recognize particular perfumes. Accounts suggest they could associate certain scents with safe hives or favored flowers. Whether this was deliberate or just an accidental quirk of bee memory, no one agrees. You kneel, pressing your palm into the moss. It's cool and damp, and as you breathe in, you catch a faint sweetness beneath the loam. Not flowers exactly, but something more like the ghost of flowers, the residue of blooms long gone, kept alive only in fragrance. Kalyanera glances at you. They're pleased. You've left your scent here now. It means they'll find you again, even far from this place. The idea is both comforting and slightly unsettling, like knowing a stranger has memorized your handwriting. Historians still debate whether these myths about bee memory were literal or symbolic. Some think the remembering place was just a sacred grove used for ceremonies. Others argue it was entirely within the mind of the bargainer, a mental space shaped by the agreement. The bees that have followed you hum in a slow arc overhead, then spiral down to the moss, landing for a moment before lifting away again. You can't tell if they're gathering something or leaving something behind. Kalyanera straightens, brushing moss from her skirt. Come, they want to show you the water. You follow her as the trees begin to thin again, a pale shimmer appearing ahead. It's not the warm gold of the meadow, but the cold gleam of moonlight on a still surface. The water lies in a shallow, stone-edged pool, fed by a thin stream that disappears into the roots of a gnarled oak. The surface is perfectly smooth until a bee touches down, sending out ripples that catch the light. Kalyanera kneels at the edge, cupping her hands to drink. They call this their mirror, she says, not for their faces, but for what's been agreed. You lean over the surface, half expecting to see your reflection as usual. Instead, the water holds a faint distortion as though you're looking at yourself through a thin layer of glass. Your features are there, but softer, blurred at the edges, and somewhere behind them, a faint shimmer of gold. Obscure tidbit: in some forgotten corners of Greek folklore, bees were said to drink from sacred springs before carrying messages to the underworld. The idea was that water could store meaning, the way honey stores light. Kalyanera dips her fingers into the pool and lets the drops fall back in. They'll keep this image here. It's how they'll remember the bargain. When the pool changes, the bargain changes. Historians still puzzle over the significance of such mirrors in these myths. Were they actual pools maintained by human hands, or entirely symbolic a way to imagine the persistence of a pact? No physical example has survived, but the descriptions suggest they were as much for the bargainer's benefit as for the bees. You touch the surface lightly. The water is cool, almost cold, and the golden shimmer deepens, curling into faint-shaped circles within circles, like the patterns in the meadow's flowers. Then it fades, leaving only your blurred reflection. Kalyanira stands, brushing her damp hands on her skirt. When you dream, she says, you might wake with the taste of this water. Don't worry, it's not a warning, it's a greeting. The bees drift low over the pool, their hum blending with the faint trickle of the stream. Somewhere beyond the trees, you hear the faint rustle of the meadow's endless spring, waiting. The pool's surface stills completely, as though even the wind has decided to let the moment be. Kalyanira turns from the water, her gaze skimming the shadows between the trees. The bees hover close, their hum soft enough now to blend with the quiet rush of the hidden stream. They'll guide you back to the edge, she says, but you won't need them to find the way. The path knows you now. Major fact: in certain ancient inscriptions from Attica, bees were carved alongside symbols of renewal, spirals, waves, crescents, as if to say the insect and the season were one and the same. The repeating forms suggested continuity, a reminder that life, like honey, could be preserved if one knew how. You follow her through the thinning grove. The air grows warmer, the moss giving way to grass, and before long the trees open into the meadow again. It hasn't changed, still caught in that suspended twilight, the flowers holding their impossible colors. Only you feel different, or lighter, or maybe just less alone. Kalyanira stops where the grass meets the first ring of blooms. This is where I leave you, she says, though her tone holds no sadness. They'll see you again. The bees circle once, twice, then break into small, drifting groups, each veering toward a different patch of flowers. One lingers near you for a heartbeat longer, before vanishing into the hum. Historians still debate whether the return from such a bargain was truly a return at all. Some believe that once you'd stepped into a place like this, the rest of the world would never feel quite the same. That seasons would always seem a little off-kilter, as though your inner calendar no longer matched anyone else's. Kalyanira tilts her head toward the horizon. When you see the first frost, she says, remember it's only visiting. She turns, walking back into the meadow's heart, and the flowers seem to close behind her. You stand for a moment, listening to the quiet where the hum used to be, before taking your first step toward home. The night is quiet, except for the faint hiss of wind over grass, a sound so steady you might mistake it for the ocean if you didn't know better. Above you, a ceiling of stars stretches from horizon to horizon, turning, unblinking, a cosmic audience that has seen every tired traveler before you. You're astride a small, sturdy horse, the kind that looks like it could run for 3 days straight, and then ask for a light snack. The saddle creaks beneath you in slow rhythm, matching the animal's easy gait. Your hands rest on the worn leather, your body sways like a pendulum. Somewhere out there, a few hundred miles of step wait for you. You will not be walking them. You will be riding half awake, half asleep, trusting your horse to know the way better than your foggy brain ever could. It's the 13th century, and you're a messenger in the service of the Mongol Empire, riding the legendary Yam network, the sprawling relay system that made news travel faster than most kingdoms could react. You probably won't make it through this day, not because you'll perish dramatically in battle, but because you'll nod off and miss half of it. Your orders are clear. Deliver a pouch of wax-sealed scrolls to a station 2 days away. No detours, no delays. It doesn't matter that your eyelids are heavy, or that you've been riding since yesterday without a proper rest. Mongol post-riders don't have the luxury of a personal day. If your horse doesn't collapse, you don't stop. And no, your job description doesn't include survive comfortably. It helps if, helps is the right word, that the Yam stations are placed at regular intervals, about 25 to 30 miles apart, each with fresh mounts and a place to gulp down fermented mare's milk before moving on. The whole system is so efficient that in the time it takes most medieval messengers to find their boots, you could deliver a royal decree across half a continent. The steppe smells of dry grass and distant smoke from some settlement you'll never visit. The air is cool, the kind that tastes faintly metallic at dawn. A single hawk circles far overhead, watching for movement in the grass. You imagine it's following you, as if you were just another part of the food chain. Historians still debate whether the riders truly slept in the saddle as much as the stories claim, or whether that's one of those exaggerated travel tales told by merchants to impress people at dinner. But tonight, as your head dips forward and your mind drifts, you begin to suspect the legend might be less of an exaggeration and more of a desperate coping mechanism. And here's a strange little tidbit for you. Some riders, it said, would tie themselves to the horse with a length of rope around the waist so they wouldn't fall off mid-slumber, which means, technically, they invented the medieval version of a seatbelt centuries before anyone thought of putting one in a car. Your rope, however, is currently tucked under your saddlebag because you're feeling reckless. Your horse snorts, shakes its head, and keeps moving at a steady pace. The rhythm lulls you again. The stars blur. You breathe in, slow and even, as if the air itself were pulling you towards sleep. Now, let's ease into tonight's journey. The steppe is waking up, though waking is a generous term here. The grass rustles lazily in the dawn wind. A few unseen insects buzz somewhere near your boots, and the horizon turns the color of warm apricots. You're still riding, still swaying, and the strange thing is you can't remember the last 5 miles. It's as if you were on some medieval moving walkway, your brain choosing the skip intro button without asking. Your horse, patient as ever, keeps to the trail. It knows the route better than you know the back of your own hand, which is a little embarrassing considering you've been over this road dozens of times. Then again, a horse's entire career is built on going from point A to point B without thinking about it too much. You, meanwhile, spend half your time wondering whether point B will at least have bread that isn't hard enough to chip a tooth. There's a Mongol proverb you once heard, though you can't remember who told it to you, that says, "A fast horse shortens the road," which is true, except it also shortens the amount of time you have to prepare mentally for whatever's waiting at the end of it. In your case, that's probably another set of orders, another pouch of messages, and another sleepless ride. The first yam station of the day appears like a smudge on the horizon, then sharpens into a cluster of low, round gares and a fenced paddock. Smoke curls up from a central fire, and you catch the faint scent of boiled mutton. You slow your horse as you approach. Not because you need to, these horses are trained to stop at stations, but because you're pretending you have some say in the matter. Inside the station, you're greeted with the brisk efficiency of people who've seen 1,000 riders exactly like you. A fresh horse is brought out, small and stocky, with a mane that looks like it hasn't been brushed in months. You hand over your current mount, take the new reins, and gulp down a wooden cup of arag. The sour fizzy tang makes you wince, as it always does, but it jolts you awake in a way no gentle sunrise ever could. Historians know that the Yam network could move messages across the empire at unprecedented speeds, sometimes up to 200 miles in a single day. Thanks to constant horse changes and tireless riders, it's the kind of logistical feat that still makes scholars marvel, and makes modern postal workers shake their heads in envy. One odd little detail you've picked up over the years. Some stations kept a supply of dried curds hard enough to be used as dice in a pinch. Riders would chew them for hours, partly to stay awake, partly to keep their mouths from drying out in the wind. You've got a piece tucked into your belt pouch right now, though you're not sure whether it's food or a potential building material. As you set off again, the grass seems to part ahead of you like a sea, the trail bending gently toward the east. The sound of hooves becomes a metronome, each beat measuring not just distance, but the slow unraveling of your awareness into something dreamlike. You glance back once at the station, already shrinking in the distance, then forward into the endless expanse, where the road, the wind, and the sky all blend into one. And there, somewhere between waking and sleeping, you realize if the historians are still debating whether riders truly slept in the saddle, you're prepared to cast your vote. You are living proof that they absolutely did. The day slides forward in quiet increments, like someone pulling a heavy curtain across the sky. The sun is higher now, bright but not yet sharp enough to sting your eyes. Your new horse moves with a brisker pace, a little less forgiving than the last one, as if it has somewhere it personally wants to be. You shift in the saddle, feeling the leather warm beneath you, the subtle ache in your knees making itself known. That's the thing about long rides, you don't notice the discomfort until it's been sitting there with you for hours, like an uninvited guest at dinner. The land here flattens into a wide sweep of grass. No hills, no trees, just open space that looks exactly like the open space you passed an hour ago. And the hour before that. This is the steppe's favorite trick. It makes you wonder if you've actually moved at all. You find yourself studying the grass for clues. as though one particular tuft might lean forward and whisper, "Yes, you're making progress." It does not. The wind shifts, bringing with it the faint smell of horse herds somewhere to the south. You picture dozens, maybe hundreds, of animals grazing under the watch of a few herders, wrapped in heavy cloaks. You won't see them, but you know they're there, the unseen lifeblood of the yam, keeping the stations supplied with fresh mounts. A curious memory surfaces. A fellow rider once told you that some Mongol messengers could identify a horse's original station just by its smell, as if the air from each place left a signature in the animal's coat. Historians still debate whether this was genuine skill or a bit of self-mythologizing, because let's be honest, it sounds suspiciously like bragging. Still, you give your new mount an experimental sniff, just in case. It smells like horse. No revelations. By midday, the heat has settled into that steady, lazy kind that makes the air shimmer at the edges of the horizon. Your eyelids droop. The horse moves. You drift. The rhythm of the hooves becomes a sort of breathing, a lullaby with a bass line. You imagine your body anchored here, while your thoughts float up and away, like clouds with no particular urgency. You catch yourself leaning forward, almost sliding into sleep, and straighten abruptly. This is your job. Keep moving, keep the pouch safe, and try not to drool on the horse's mane. In that order. An odd detail. Riders sometimes carried dried sheep dung not as fuel, but as a scent ward. Supposedly, a whiff of it could mask the human smell enough to keep wolves disinterested. You think about that now and decide, in a rare moment of self-congratulation, that you're glad your pouch is free of sheep dung. If wolves show up, they can file their complaints directly with your horse. The light shifts again, sliding toward late afternoon. Shadows stretch across the grass like someone spilling ink on the land. Ahead, the faint outline of another yam station rises, this one with its gears clustered tighter together, as though huddling against the wind. You'll change horses again, drink another cup of arag, maybe eat something if you're lucky. Then it's back to the trail, where the hours and miles melt together until they feel the same. You breathe deep. The air tastes like sun-warmed dust. You keep riding. And, just for a moment, you let your eyes close. You open your eyes to find that the sun has shifted noticeably, and the station you were aiming for is now much closer, which is unsettling, because you don't remember the last stretch at all. This is either proof of your incredible efficiency or your alarming capacity for unconscious travel. Your horse, entirely unbothered, keeps a steady pace. As you approach, the familiar choreography begins. Attendants emerge from the gears, one taking your reins, while another leads out a fresh mount. You swing down from the saddle, your legs briefly forgetting what solid ground feels like. Someone presses a small leather bag of dried curds into your hand before you can even ask. You pop one into your mouth, nearly breaking a tooth in the process. Delicious, in the way that survival food is delicious, meaning it's edible and vaguely comforting, if not exactly a treat. The station master, a wiry man with a face weathered like cracked leather, inspects your pouch of messages. He doesn't open it. Sealed orders are sacred, but he weighs it in his hand as though he can divine the contents. "Eastbound," he mutters, mostly to himself. Then he nods and hands it back. Historians note that the Yam network wasn't just for imperial decrees, carried everything from military orders to diplomatic gifts, even personal letters between nobles. Sometimes a rider like you might unknowingly be carrying something that could decide the fate of an entire province. Other times, it might be a politely worded request for more tea. The system didn't care. Both traveled with the same urgency. There's a strange custom here, one you've only half understood. Riders sometimes carve small marks into a post at the station, a sort of secret roll call for those who've passed through. It's not official, and no one talks about it much. You add your own mark out of habit, a quicklime, scratched into the wood before mounting your next horse. It feels like leaving a whisper behind for someone you'll never meet. The new horse is younger, more restless. It jerks its head and stamps once before settling into a brisk trot. The land begins to tilt subtly upward, the grass giving way to patches of bare earth. The wind here is sharper, slicing through your coat. You pull it tighter around you and hunch forward, your mind settling into that quiet, drifting place again. You pass a lone traveler heading west, bundled in layers, his camel trailing behind him. The two of you exchange brief nods, an unspoken acknowledgement that you are both specks on the same endless canvas. His figure shrinks in the distance until he's gone, swallowed by the land. The sky deepens toward evening, that in-between light where colors seem richer, the air heavier, the horse's breathing slows, matching your own. You think about the miles still ahead, about the possibility, no, the inevitability that you'll doze off again before reaching the next station. And you realize that the strange magic of the yam isn't just speed or efficiency, it's that it turns the vast, unpredictable step into something almost dreamlike. You glance at the horizon, the line between earth and sky blurring in the dimming light. Somewhere out there, another station waits, with another horse, another cup of sour milk, another brief pause before the road swallows you again. And for now, that's enough. The evening arrives not with fanfare, but with that slow, deliberate dimming that makes you feel as though someone is gently turning down the world's lantern. Your horse's hooves drum a softer rhythm now, muffled by the denser grass that creeps back into the landscape. The air cools against your cheeks, carrying the faint smell of damp soil and oddly wild onions. Somewhere under this wide blanket of sky, life is rooting itself into the earth, oblivious to your passing. Your body sways more than rides now. This is the dangerous hour, the in-between, when you're too tired to be fully awake and too stubborn to stop. You rub at your eyes, half expecting that will help. It doesn't. The horse shifts pace slightly, and you imagine it's trying to decide whether you're worth the effort of keeping upright. Here's a fact. The yam wasn't just for Mongol riders. Merchants, envoys, and even foreign ambassadors could use the system if they had a paisba, the official tablet of authority. Flash that badge and doors opened, horses were swapped, food appeared. It was the medieval equivalent of a VIP pass, except it got you a fresh mare instead of backstage concert access. You, however, have no such tablet. You have a leather pouch and a face that says, "I've been on a horse too long." A weird tidbit you once overheard from a station keeper. Some riders claim that chewing on willow bark helped keep them awake during the longer night stretches. It was bitter, but it worked, maybe because willow bark contains salicin, maybe because bitterness itself is a rude little alarm clock. You glance at the surrounding steppe, wondering how many willows you've passed without noticing. Historians still debate whether the night rides were more dangerous than the day ones. Bandits were rare under Mongol rule, the punishments were severe, but wild animals and accidents in the dark were real threats. A fall at night was colder, lonelier, and less likely to be witnessed. You try not to think about that. Instead, you focus on the sound of your horse's breathing, steady and sure. The moon rises, pale and round, painting a silver sheen over the grass. The horizon fades into shadow, and the world shrinks to the width of the trail ahead. Your eyelids dip again. You startle awake, straighten, and mutter something vague to your horse, who ignores you completely. In this moment, it's hard to tell if you're part of the steppe or just passing through it. Either way, the night seems in no hurry, and neither are you, at least not in your bones. You keep riding. The moonlight turns the steppe into a vast, empty sea, the grass shimmering like slow-moving waves. You let the horse guide you now, the reins loose in your hands. Your mind drifts to thoughts that have nothing to do with your task, like whether the next station will have bread, or if anyone has ever actually counted the stars overhead. The cold creeps in steadily, a polite but firm guest, making itself comfortable in your joints. You pull your coat tighter, wishing for the heavy felt cloaks the herders wear. The horse exhales, a plume of steam in the pale light, and you swear it's warmer than you are. The second night station is smaller than the others, just 2 gears in a paddock, no smoke from the fire. The attendant is a young woman with sharp eyes and quick hands, moving silently as she swaps your mount for another. She hands you a skin of water and a small pouch of something that smells faintly sweet. Inside are roasted millet grains meant to be chewed slowly, a simple comfort in the middle of the road. Here's your fact for the night. While the yam stations were built for speed, they also doubled as intelligence outposts. Attendants reported who passed through, when, and sometimes even what they carried. The Empire's leaders always knew what moved along their roads: your progress, your delays, all noted by someone's careful hand, and your obscure tidbit. Some riders claimed that during long winter rides, they would sing quietly to their horses to stay awake, not loud enough for anyone else to hear, just enough for the rhythm to keep them alert. You've never tried it, but tonight, with the cold chewing at your ears, you hum a few low notes under your breath. The horse flicks an ear back at you, which you choose to interpret as appreciation rather than annoyance. Historians still debate how much autonomy riders had on the route, whether you could choose to rest longer at a station if you were dangerously tired, or if orders overruled your exhaustion entirely. Judging by the woman's brisk nod when she hands you the new reins, you suspect the latter. You set off again into the silver-lit darkness. The cold presses in, but your mind feels oddly light, like a lantern in the wind. Somewhere far behind you is the day you started this ride. Somewhere ahead is the day you'll stop. For now, it's just the night, the road, and the sound of hooves carrying you deeper into both. Dawn doesn't so much arrive as seep into the world, pale light soaking the horizon until you realize you can see your own breath in color. Your horse moves in that half-reluctant, half-dutiful way that suggests it, too, could use another hour of sleep. The grass is heavy with dew, and the scent of wet earth rises with every step. It's a new day, though new feels like a word meant for people who actually stop to sleep in between. You're not exactly fresh. You're something else worn in, like a boot that's molded to the foot, not particularly beautiful but functional. You scratch at the inside of your glove and think about the next station. The promise of warmth and maybe a scrap of dried meat, if fortune is in a generous mood. Here's a solid fact to ride with. The YAM system is said to have been so vast that there were over 1,000 relay stations scattered across the empire at its peak. That's an empire the size of multiple modern countries stitched together with nothing more than hoofbeats and discipline. The speed of news could make or break campaigns, keep enemies off balance, and remind distant governors that yes, the Great Khan really was watching. For something more obscure, you remember a story told by an older rider one cold night how some stations were marked, not by signs or banners, but by lone standing stones painted white. The idea was that they would catch the light at dawn or dusk, guiding riders who might be too drowsy to notice anything else. You keep your eyes out for one now, just in case. Historians still debate whether those painted stones were truly common or just a regional quirk. But as you crest a small rise, there it is, a lone rock, pale against the grass, casting a long shadow in the early light. It's almost absurdly reassuring, like a friend waving from far away. Your horse flicks its ears forward, as if recognizing the landmark too. The air tastes faintly of wood smoke, someone's breakfast fire. You try to remember the last hot meal you had, and fail. The details blur together, replaced by the steady loop of riding, changing mounts, and chasing the horizon. You adjust in the saddle, bones cracking, eyes half on the trail and half on the way the light spills across the land. You tell yourself you'll stay alert, at least until the next stop. You might even mean it. The next station appears as a smudge of movement, horses shifting in a corral, a figure stepping from a gare, with a hand raised in greeting. You ride in, muscles grateful for the promise of a brief pause. The station keeper, a stout man with an impressive fur hat, gives your current horse a quick once-over before swapping it for a fresh one. The exchange happens so quickly, you barely have time to stretch your legs. You're handed a bowl of steaming broth. It's thin but hot, scented with something herbal you can't place. You drink it in slow sips, letting the warmth seep into your chest. No one talks much here. Words seem unnecessary when the road itself is the conversation. For today's historical fact, some Mongol post riders were known to cover their route faster than others, simply because they'd learned to nap in short bursts without ever dismounting. These were the riders that turned legends into logistics, shaving hours off delivery times without sacrificing accuracy. It's both impressive and slightly alarming. Your weird tidbit for the day comes from an old attendant, who once claimed that certain horses preferred to follow specific riders, recognizing their scent or their voice and adjusting their pace accordingly. Supposedly, this could result in a faster or smoother ride. If the bond was strong, you've never had a horse follow you from station to station, but you like to think your current mount would at least remember your voice. Historians still debate whether these station horses were rotated randomly, or if attendants intentionally matched certain mounts with certain riders for efficiency. Watching the way this new horse settles under you with minimal fuss, you wonder if maybe there's some quiet system at work, invisible but intentional. You set out again, broth still warming your insides, the wind sharper now as the land opens into a long straight stretch. The trail ahead seems endless, a ribbon laid across the earth. Behind you, the station shrinks and disappears, leaving only the rhythm of hooves and the quiet hum of the waking step. Somewhere far to the east, the sun climbs higher. Your eyes narrow against the light, but you keep going. The day is young. The road, as always, is older than both of you. By midday, the light is so bright it bleaches the edges of the world. The horizon feels farther away than usual, as if someone has stretched it just to test your patience. Your horse moves with a steady lope, hoofs drumming a beat you could almost hum along to if you weren't so busy trying not to slide into unconsciousness. The heat builds gradually, like a polite but relentless argument you can't win. You loosen your coat, roll your shoulders, and remind yourself that sweat is better than frostbite, though only marginally. The air tastes dry, almost dusty, and you can feel it clinging to the back of your throat. Here's a fact for the long road. The yam wasn't just about the riders, it was also about the horses, each trained to handle both speed and endurance. Mongol ponies might not have been the tallest or sleekest, but they could survive on minimal feed, drink when they had the chance, and still carry a rider for dozens of miles without complaint. In short, they were the original all-terrain vehicles, only warmer and more opinionated. An odd tidbit you remember from another rider. Some claimed the horses could sense a rider's drowsiness and adjust their gait to keep them balanced, almost like they were cradling you in motion. Whether that's skill, instinct, or wishful thinking is unclear. But today you're hoping your mount is a firm believer in that theory. Historians still debate whether riders were required to stick strictly to the trail, or if they had leeway to choose alternate routes when conditions demanded. Some records suggest flexibility, others imply the route was sacred. You glance at the faint ruts ahead of you and decide that, sacred or not, this track is the only one that looks vaguely navigable. The next station takes its time appearing, a faint smudge on the far side of a low rise. You start counting hoofbeats to stay awake. 50, then 100, then you lose track somewhere around 200 and just let the rhythm carry you. When you finally ride in, the attendant greets you with the efficiency of someone who has performed the same exchange thousands of times. Your current mount is whisked away, a fresh horse brought forward. You drink water so cold it makes your teeth ache, then set off again without lingering. The road waits for no one, not even those half asleep. The afternoon stretches long, the sky wide and unbroken except for a single hawk circling far above. Your new horse has a shorter stride, which changes the rhythm enough to feel almost foreign under you. It takes a few miles for the two of you to settle into a shared pace. The air here smells faintly of sage. The land is drier, the grass sparser, giving way to patches of sandy soil. You shift in the saddle, feeling every seam in the leather, every small complaint from your muscles. Your hands ache faintly from gripping the reins, though you know you're holding them more loosely than when you started this journey. For today's fact, the yam wasn't only about speed, it was about consistency. Riders could cover up to 200 miles in a single day, but the real strength of the system was that it could sustain that pace for weeks. No other medieval empire could match that combination of reach and reliability. Your obscure tidbit: some stations had trained birds, ravens, or hawks that could be sent ahead with short messages if the next rider was delayed. These weren't used for full deliveries, just urgent warnings. You've never seen one in action, but the idea of a hawk carrying a note across the steppe is strangely satisfying. Historians still debate whether the bird system was ever officially part of the yam, or just an improvisation in certain regions. Either way, you can't help but scan the sky for a flash of wings, half hoping to spot one. The wind picks up, carrying a sharper edge now, hinting at evening to come. The sun lowers, the light softening, the shadows lengthening, like slow-moving ink across the ground. You realize your eyes have been half closed for the past mile, trusting the horse entirely. It's not exactly wise, but it's comfortable, and comfort is a rare commodity here. Somewhere ahead, the faint dark smudge of the next station begins to form. You straighten in the saddle, not from duty, but from the small flicker of anticipation that always comes with the thought of stopping, even briefly. You'll change horses again, drink whatever they offer, maybe even stretch your legs before the road swallows you back. The steppe rolls on, patient and endless, as if it's been waiting centuries just for you to ride across it. And you, in turn, ride as if you could go on forever. The station's fire is already lit when you arrive, its smoke curling into the cooling sky like an absent-minded signature. You hand over your current horse, patting its flank in silent thanks. The fresh mount they bring you is stockier, with a coat the color of dust and a slightly judgmental expression. If horses can, in fact, judge, you swing into the saddle, grateful for the firmness beneath you. Even if your muscles have started to file quiet complaints to your brain, the attendant offers you a cup of warm tea steeped with dried herbs. You sip slowly, letting the steam fog your vision. It's bitter, with an earthy undercurrent that reminds you vaguely of damp wool. You've learned not to ask exactly what's in it sometimes. Comfort is better than knowledge. Here's a fact to carry into the evening. The yam's efficiency relied on precise timing. Riders weren't just sent off randomly. Their schedules were coordinated so messages could pass seamlessly from one to the next without long gaps. The system ran like a living clock, one that could gallop, stumble, and gallop again. For something more obscure, you once heard that certain stations kept a carved wooden horse head above their door as a charm against accidents. Supposedly, the more weather-worn the carving, the more protection it offered. You glance back as you leave and spot one. Its features faded to near abstraction, like it's been staring into the wind for decades. Historians still debate whether these charms were purely symbolic or if they had roots in older steppe traditions that predated the Mongol Empire. Either way, you find yourself oddly reassured by its presence, as though it had silently approved your departure. The road darkens quickly as you ride east. The moon will rise late tonight, leaving you in shadow for hours. The horizon ahead feels heavier without light, the trail faint under the hooves. You lean forward slightly, trusting the horse's shoe-footedness more than your own instincts. In the deepening quiet, the rhythm of its gait becomes a lull, the steppe breathing around you like an enormous, patient animal. Night claims the landscape completely now. The stars take their places above you, brilliant, sharp, almost too numerous to look at for long. The air has cooled enough to sting your nose. Each exhale from your horse drifts upward like a signal no one will ever answer. The world narrows to sound and feel. The muffled thud of hooves, the swish of grass against the horse's legs, the creak of leather under your weight. You loosen your grip on the reins, letting the animal find its own rhythm. You've done this enough to know that trying to control too much in the dark usually ends with you in the dirt. Here's your historical fact for the hour. In some stretches of the Yam, night travel was expected, not optional. Certain messages were so time-sensitive that the riders moved continuously, day and night, with only the briefest pauses to change mounts and gulp food. It wasn't about comfort, it was about the unbroken chain of motion. Your obscure tidbit: riders sometimes used small bronze bells tied to their saddles at night. The soft jingling served to purposes alerting any nearby wildlife of their approach and helping them stay awake through the monotony. You imagine the sound blending with the wind, the kind of detail you'd forget if you weren't listening for it. Historians still debate whether those bells were common or more of a personal choice among riders. You've never had one, but tonight, in the silence, you wonder if a little music might not be the worst idea. Hours pass in a steady, dreamlike drift. Your thoughts start to blur into shapes and fragments, faces you haven't seen in years, meals you never finished, words you meant to say to someone once. The road has a way of pulling those things out, like threads unraveling in the dark. At some point, the faint glow of a station appears ahead, flickering like a lantern in the sea of black. Relief is quiet but immediate. You straighten in the saddle, more awake now, the pull of the firelight guiding you forward. In another few minutes, you'll change horses again. You'll drink something hot, maybe eat something small. And then, without ceremony, you'll ride back out into the dark. The road, after all, doesn't pause just because the night feels endless. The station's fire snaps and hisses as you ride in, casting long shadows that flicker over the gears. The attendant meets you with a nod, already reaching for your reins. Your new horse is waiting, slightly taller than the others, with a darker coat that glistens faintly in the firelight. You take the cup of broth they offer, its steam curling into the night, and let the warmth seep into your fingers before you even drink. The broth is rich with fat, carrying the faint tang of fermented milk. You drink it slowly, more for the heat than the flavor. The station smells faintly of smoke, leather, and horse, a blend that feels almost like home after so many days repeating this rhythm. Here's a fact to keep in mind. The Yam wasn't simply a messenger system. It was also a quiet network of observation. Station keepers took note of everything who passed, what they carried, and how quickly they traveled. In this way, the Empire's pulse was measured by hoofbeats. Your obscure tidbit for tonight: some riders believed that if you left a small offering, like a coin or a scrap of cloth tucked under the station's threshold, the spirits of the road would grant you safe passage. You've never been much for superstition, but you've seen enough others do it to wonder if maybe you've been riding under their borrowed luck. Historians still debate how much of this ritual blended with older shamanic traditions, and how much was simply riders making their own small bargains with fate. You decide to leave a sliver of dried curd under the edge of the gare before you mount up again. It's not much, but maybe the road will appreciate the gesture. You ride out into the darkness once more, your horse's breath puffing steadily in the cold air. The wind is sharper now, tugging at your coat, carrying with it the faint scent of snow from somewhere far off. The stars are clear and bright enough to seem close enough to imagine you could reach up and take one with you. The rhythm of the ride settles in again, each hoofbeat a soft metronome in the quiet. You don't think about the miles left. You just keep moving, one step at a time. The night is long enough that you forget when it started. The stars wheel overhead, and you lose track of how many constellations have passed in and out of view. Your horse moves like a machine, steady, unhesitating, while your mind drifts in and out of shallow dreams. You wake to the sound of hooves slowing, not because you've told them to, but because the horse knows a station is near. Ahead, the faint outline of low buildings emerges from the dark. The station here is larger, with several fires burning and a corral full of horses shifting restlessly. You dismount stiffly, passing the reins to a broad-shouldered man with a weathered face. He hands you a small cup of warm kumi without a word. The drink is sour and fizzy, familiar enough now that you barely wince. For your historical fact, during the height of the Yam, some riders were so well trained that they could recite their orders word for word after only hearing them once, in case written messages were lost or stolen. The human memory was sometimes the safest courier of all. Your odd tidbit: certain stations were rumored to have lucky saddles that riders could borrow for especially difficult stretches. Whether the luck was in the craftsmanship or the collective belief of dozens of riders is unclear, but some swore they made the difference between arriving whole and arriving less whole. Historians still debate whether these saddles were real artifacts passed down through the years, or if they were simply the result of a station keeper handing you their newest, least lumpy saddle and letting the myth do the rest. You can't help but glance at the tack room here, just in case one is hanging inside. When you set off again, the fires behind you glow like a cluster of tiny suns in the distance. The air is colder now, the sky lighter at the Ajissa, hint that dawn is thinking about returning. You lean forward slightly, letting the horse's steady movement carry you into that in-between state again, where waking and dreaming trade places without asking permission. Somewhere ahead, the last leg of this journey waits. The thought is both a relief and, strangely, a little sad. After all, once you arrive, there will be no more nights like this until, of course, the next message needs to be carried. The first threads of dawn stretch across the horizon, thin and pale, as if the night is reluctant to loosen its grip. Your horse's breath is steady, the sound of hooves muted by damp earth. The road is familiar now your body knows its rhythm, even when your mind drifts. You can feel the weight of the pouch at your side, a quiet reminder of why you've crossed these hundreds of miles without pause. The final station is close enough that you can smell its fires before you see them. The air carries a faint mix of smoke, boiled meat, and the woolly scent of horses. You crest a gentle rise, and there it is, a cluster of gares, the paddock full, and a few early risers moving between fires with the slow purpose of people who've done this every morning for years. Here's the last fact to pocket. The Yam didn't just connect cities, it stitched together cultures, carrying not only messages but also songs, spices, stories, and news. Every rider, knowingly or not, became a thread in the vast weaving of the Empire's reach. Your obscure tidbit: some riders ended their journey with a ritual circling the station 3 times before dismounting, a way of settling the road spirits and leaving the miles behind. You've never done it before, but today, with the weight of the long ride pressing on your shoulders, you guide your horse into a slow, easy loop. Once, twice, 3 times. The attendants watch without comment. Historians still debate whether these closing rituals were personal quirks or shared traditions. It doesn't matter. The act feels like closing a book, a small gesture to say enough for now. You dismount, handing the reins to a young attendant who leads the horse away. The station master takes your pouch with both hands, checking the seal before nodding approval. There's no ceremony, no applause, just the quiet acknowledgement that you've done what was needed. And then it's over. The road, for this moment, belongs to someone else. It begins in the soft stillness before dawn. The desert has that strange, deceptive quiet, like it's promising you a gentle day, even though you know better. A pale blue haze sits just above the horizon. The air is cool enough to make you wonder if you imagined yesterday's heat, and the world smells faintly of dust and bread. Somewhere nearby, a baker is already shoveling flatbreads into a clay oven, the smoky scent drifting lazily between narrow mud brick walls. You are in the heart of ancient Persia, a place where sunlight will soon bake everything into a shimmering mirage, and where the people remarkably have figured out how to keep ice frozen in this very same desert. Yes, ice. In the desert, you probably won't make it through this day without wondering how on earth they pull it off. You walk slowly, sandals brushing against the fine sand scattered over the street. The stones are uneven, warm from yesterday, and a few cats are already stretched out on ledges, pretending they've been up all night catching mice instead of sleeping. The city is waking up reluctantly, like it knows the sun's about to start its daily interrogation. Somewhere ahead, a long shadow stretches out from a building shaped like no other. Its smooth, conical form rising against the pale sky. It's a yakchal, a towering mud brick structure that looks like an upside-down beehive. This is the Persian ice house, the world's first natural refrigerator. Inside, blocks of ice harvested in winter or frozen in carefully dug pools are stored under layers of straw and insulation, staying frozen for months, even through the furnace of midsummer. There's a faint, sweet chill when you step inside. The thick walls, 2 meters deep in some places, swallow the heat whole. You trail your fingers along the cool surface, and the sound of your footsteps is muted, like the building is listening. It smells faintly of wet straw, clay, and a whisper of something sweet. They tell you that in summer, the ice will be shaved into bowls, mixed with rosewater, saffron, and pistachios. That's faluda, a delicately frozen dessert, so refined you'd think it was the invention of a Parisian chef, not a civilization surrounded by sand dunes. The fact is, Persian engineers were building these ice houses as far back as the 5th century BC. And here's the obscure bit. Some yakshals even had subterranean wind catchers, channeling cool night air through underground passages, like an early form of air conditioning. The desert may try to cook you, but the Persians learned how to keep the kitchen cold. Historians still debate whether these yakshals doubled as community gathering spaces, places to linger, gossip, and store more than just ease, or if that's just a romantic interpretation by people who like their history with a touch of neighborly charm. You linger a little too long in the coolness, feeling the contrast against the brightening light outside. It's like standing in the memory of winter, while summer sharpens its knives just beyond the doorway. Now, let's ease into tonight's journey. You step back into the growing heat, ready to follow the trail from this beehive-shaped wonder to the lives it cooled. The street is busier now. Merchants are setting up stalls, unfolding carpets in the shade, and placing jars of dates and apricots where the light will make them glow like jewels. You keep walking, because your guide, a thin man with the patience of a cat and the sarcasm of an older cousin, has decided you need to see the ice-making pools before the sun climbs too high. The pools are nothing fancy, shallow, rectangular basins dug into the earth, lined with clay. But here's the trick: position them so they're shaded from the afternoon sun and open to the bitter cold of winter nights. During the freezing season, water left in these basins will ice over, even in a desert climate. Come morning, workers haul the ice in thick slabs to the yakchal, stacking them like treasure in the deep cool. It's simple, brilliant, and you're beginning to see why ancient Persia was not to be underestimated. The guide points out the walls surrounding some pools, tall, mud brick barriers angled just right to block the sun and trap the cold night air. It's like nature's freezer, except there's no electricity bill, no humming compressor, and no neighbor stealing your popsicles. You pass a group of women carrying clay jars, their laughter light and quick. They're buying ice for a wedding feast, the guide says, and you picture it. Ice-chilled rosewater drinks in delicate bowls, mint leaves bobbing lazily on the surface. Guests gossiping about the bride's dowry, while pretending not to. And here's your weird tidbit for the day. In some towns, they would bury eggs in the ice, not for refrigeration exactly, but for superstition. The belief was that eggs kept cold over winter would bring luck to planting in the spring. No one's entirely sure if this was common practice or just a strange quirk of one region, but the mental image of someone digging around in a frozen heap for lucky eggs is hard to shake. The sun is higher now, gilding the clay walls in a glow that looks warm but feels merciless. The guide warns you that by midday, you'll understand why people here moved slowly, planned everything around shade, and cherished their ice as if it were gold. He also mentions, almost offhand, that the Persian word for cool and the word for calm share a root. You can't decide if that's poetic coincidence or evidence of a culture that knew exactly how much easier it is to be patient when you're not sweating. Historians still debate whether the language shaped the lifestyle or the lifestyle shaped the language. The pools shimmer behind you as you head back toward the city, your feet stirring up little puffs of dust. Somewhere in the distance, a camel groans in a tone that could mean good morning, or why am I awake? Either way, you're starting to think that in a land where winter is stored underground and summer is tamed with engineering, the people have long been fluent in the art of surviving without rushing. And you'll need that art soon, because the sun is only just beginning to turn the air into glass. You find yourself back in a quieter part of the city, where narrow alleys tangle into each other like forgotten threads. The air is still holding on to its morning cool, though you can feel it slipping through your fingers. In one courtyard, a young boy is sweeping sand away from a doorway, an effort as futile as trying to keep the sea from touching your toes. You offer a nod. He pauses, eyes curious, and then returns to his sweeping with the resigned grace of someone who knows the desert always wins. Your guide wants to show you where the ice becomes dessert. The real magic, he says, is not in making the ice, it's in making it sing. That's a flourish you didn't expect from a man wearing a turban slightly askew and sandals older than your travel bag. The shop you enter is small but fragrant, the scent of saffron and cardamom curling in the air like lazy smoke. The owner is already working a slab of ice into fine crystalline shavings with a long, curved knife. The sound is soft, rhythmic, like snow being brushed from a roof. Into a clay bowl, he drops the shavings, then drizzles them with rosewater, a golden thread of honey, and a scattering of crushed pistachios. You take a tentative taste. The cold is immediate and surprising, the flavor floral and bright in a way that feels almost too delicate for this heat. You think of the desert outside, its dryness and glare, and realize this is not just a treat, it's a victory. Here's the historical fact, tucked neatly inside this bowl. By the 4th century BCE, Persians had developed a variety of chilled dishes like this, known as sharbat, which later inspired the concept of sherbet in Europe. It wasn't just indulgence, it was status, hospitality, and, in a climate like this, a small rebellion against nature. The shopkeeper tells you that in some old recipes, they even mixed the ice with fermented juices or flower syrups believed to have medicinal properties. That's your weird cultural tidbit for the hour. The belief that a desert could literally cure a headache, mend a broken heart, or restore your inner cool. Historians still debate whether those remedies worked, or if it was simply the shock of something frozen against your teeth in midsummer that reset your mood. A few customers come and go, taking their bowls to shaded stoops outside. You notice that no one here eats in a hurry. Each spoonful is a pause, a sigh, an unspoken acknowledgement that good things are not meant to be rushed. The guide waits until you've scraped the last bit of melting sweetness from the bowl. Come, he says, with the air of someone introducing the next act of a long play. We've seen where the ice comes from. Now, we'll see who brings it here. The road out of the market is busier now, lined with traders carrying everything from baskets of herbs to bolts of silk, in colors so vivid they seem to glow. You follow the guide toward the city gates, where the hum of activity becomes something more like a low, constant roar. Camels kneel, their loads heavy with goods from the mountains and beyond. And there, tucked between a caravan of wool merchants and a cart of pottery, is what you've come to see. The ice caravan. Each block of ice is wrapped in layers of straw, bound tightly with rope, and stacked into crates. The crates themselves are lashed onto donkeys and camels, which seem to bear the chill with the same grim patience as they do the heat. These blocks may have come from nearby frozen pools or, in some cases, from glaciers far to the north, brought down along trade routes that weave like veins through the empire. Here's your major historical fact. Persian engineers and merchants had mastered the logistics of ice transport centuries before mechanical refrigeration. It was a feat of timing, insulation, and sheer stubbornness, making it possible for cities hundreds of miles from snow to serve chilled drinks in summer. The guide points to one of the camel drivers, a wiry man with sunburned cheeks. They say, he murmurs, that some of them talk to the ice at night to keep it from melting. He says this so matter-of-factly, you almost don't catch the humor until you notice the twitch at the corner of his mouth. And here's the strange tidbit. In certain regions, it was believed that whispering prayers or blessings to ice during transport would bind the cold, slowing the melt. Whether this was ritual, superstition, or just a clever way to keep the caravanners awake during night travel, historians are still unsure. You step aside as the camels shuffle past, their breath visible in small puffs, the contrast of icy cargo in the warm morning air. It's a scene that feels quietly absurd. The desert itself, making room for winter, carried in straw and rope. The guide reminds you of the yakchal you visited earlier. It's dark, echoing cool. Every block here, he says, is a promise to someone waiting in the city, a promise of shade for the tongue. And you can't help but think that in a world this dry, that promise might be more valuable than gold. The caravan's slow departure feels like the end of a parade you didn't realize you were watching. The camels sway away toward the horizon, their steps patient, deliberate, like they've agreed to take exactly as long as it takes, and not a moment less. The dust they leave behind swirls lazily in the air before settling back onto the road, as if even it doesn't have the energy to hurry. You turn back toward the city, following your guide into a side street you haven't walked before. It's narrow enough that the awnings overhead nearly meet, casting a dappled shade on the cobbles. Here, life hums more softly, a potter shaping clay with methodical precision, a pair of children playing a game that involves tossing pebbles into the cracks between stones, and an old man sitting cross-legged, weaving something from reeds. He's making ice baskets. The guide explains straw-wrapped carriers designed to fit snugly around smaller chunks of ice. These are 4 households that don't have the means or space for a whole block, but still want a taste of summer luxury. The baskets keep the ice from dripping too quickly, and perhaps more importantly, keep it from sticking to your fingers. Because as much as you love the idea of ancient deserts, frostbite is a decidedly unromantic detail. Here's today's major historical fact. These woven carriers weren't just practical, they were also sometimes decorated with dyes and patterns, a signal of pride in the craftsmanship, and, in wealthier homes, a sign of social status. Displaying an ice basket at a gathering was a subtle way of saying, yes, we can afford imported winter in August, and yes, you're welcome. For your obscure tidbit, there was a belief, at least in some corners of Persia, that certain plant dyes used in weaving could cool the spirit of the ice and slow its melting. Whether this was based on an actual cooling property of the materials or was simply decorative superstition, historians still debate. Your guide leans toward the decorative theory, but you notice he doesn't say it too loudly, perhaps out of respect for the weaver's pride. The old man catches you watching and raises his eyebrows, as if to say, yes, I know exactly what I'm doing. Then he goes back to his weaving, hands moving with a rhythm that could lull you into a nap if you weren't careful. You move on, past a shaded courtyard where a cluster of women are grinding spices. The air here smells faintly of coriander and sumac, with a whisper of mint. It's the kind of scent that makes you think of cool drinks before you even realize you're thirsty. The guide catches your glance toward the door and smirks. You'll see more of that soon, he says, and his tone suggests he's not talking about spices alone. The guide leads you to the outer edge of the city, where cultivated gardens stretch out like green pockets stitched into the sandy fabric of the land. The sound of running water greets you thin, musical streams flowing along narrow channels carved into the earth. These are quilts, underground aqueducts that carry water from distant mountains to feed the fields and gardens, the lifelines of this dry empire. And here's the marvel. Some of these same quilts help keep icehouses cool, channeling water beneath or alongside their walls to maintain a low internal temperature. It's passive cooling on an enormous scale, perfected centuries before electricity. Your guide gestures toward a shaded alcove where the channel dips out of sight. It's not magic, he says, but it might as well be. The garden paths are lined with pomegranate trees, heavy with fruit, their skin glowing red orange against the leaves. You pass a group of gardeners drawing water up in clay pots, their movements slow and practiced, each one careful not to spill a drop. This water is not just for thirst, it's for the delicate crops that will become flavors in those icy summer treats. Rose petals, mint, sweet basil. Here's your strange tidbit. In some households, a small sprig of basil or mint was placed in the ice before storage, not for flavoring, but because it was thought to teach the ice a pleasant scent. Whether that belief began as a poetic metaphor or a literal superstition, historians are divided. You suppose that if you're going to have ice in the desert, you might as well train it to smell nice. The air here is cooler than in the streets, and you linger in the shade of a fig tree while the guide points out a low, domed building beyond the gardens. That, he says, is where the flavors are prepared. The dome is ringed by small vents, and you can almost smell the sweetness from here. Inside, the air is thick with the perfume of flowers. Women sit in a circle, carefully plucking rose petals into wide baskets. They'll be dried in the shade, then steeped in water to make rosewater syrup, one of the key ingredients in Faluda and Sharbat. In another corner, a man stirs a pot of thick, golden syrup over a low fire, adding saffron threads so fine they vanish the instant they touch the surface. Your guide leans in with the kind of conspiratorial tone that's usually reserved for gossip. Some say, he murmurs, that the best rosewater can only be made when the moon is waning, so the flowers release more of their scent. He shrugs. Or maybe that's just a story to make people buy more in certain weeks. You take in the sound of the petals rustling, the slow bubble of syrup, the steady heartbeat of a culture that has spent centuries perfecting the art of turning winter's memory into summer's delight. And somewhere deep in the city, the ice you saw this morning waits, patient and silent, for its moment to be paired with these scents. By midday, the air is turned into something you can almost see, a soft, shimmering haze that makes the building sway gently if you stare too long. The guide suggests a rest, which you take as a polite way of saying, if we keep walking, you might melt. You find shade beneath a stretched awning in a tea house, the kind of place where the ceiling is low, the light is amber, and the world outside feels like someone else's problem. A clay cup of mint tea arrives, steaming despite the heat outside. You sip slowly, realizing that, in a place this warm, the logic isn't to fight heat with cold, but to balance it with something equally steady. The tea makes you sweat just enough for the breeze through the doorway to feel like mercy. You think of the ice again, not just the cold shock of it on the tongue, but the quiet patience required to keep it. Ice is not a frantic thing here. It's a slow thing, a companion to endurance. The tea house owner, an older woman with a laugh like a door creaking open, sets a small dish on the tabla, frozen treat, pale and soft, melting just at the edges. It's Faluda, she explains, the vermicelli-like strands of starch trapped inside the icy mix. A drizzle of sour cherry syrup cuts through the sweetness, and the first spoonful makes you wonder if time has actually stopped. Here's your major historical fact for the moment. Faluda is one of the oldest known frozen desserts in the world, with origins dating back to at least 400 BCE in Persia. Later, it traveled along trade routes, influencing icy treats as far away as India and the Mediterranean. For your obscure tidbit, the tea house owner insists half seriously that Faluda tastes best if eaten in odd numbers of bites. Even numbers, she says, trap the flavor in your mouth. Odd numbers let it wander into your dreams. Historians have not weighed in on this theory, perhaps because they are too busy testing it privately. The guide watches you finish, then glances toward the doorway, where the sunlight has shifted into a brighter, heavier gold. Come, he says, the worst of the day is beginning, and that is the best time to find the coldest place in the city. You step back into the sun and instantly feel like you've walked into an oven. Even the shadows seem to be sweating. The guide leads you along a winding route, ducking into narrow alleys that carry hints of cooler air until you reach a doorway set deep into the earth. It's unassuming from the outside, but as soon as you step in, the temperature drops enough to make you breathe differently. You're in the Connaught tunnels. The air is damp here, scented with clay and minerals, and the only sound is the slow trickle of water running through the carved channel beside the path. The ceiling is low in places, forcing you to stoop, and the walls are smooth from centuries of touch. Here's your historical fact. Quilts are an ancient Persian innovation, a network of gently sloping underground tunnels that bring water from mountain aquifers to arid regions without losing it to evaporation. Some of these systems have been in continuous use for over 2,500 years. The guide tells you that certain parts of the Connaught system were used to store and transport ice underground during the hottest months, moving it closer to the heart of the city without exposing it to the sun. You imagine blocks of ice sliding quietly through the dark, the desert completely unaware above. For your strange tidbit, he adds that there are old stories of travelers using the Quilts as secret passageways, not just for water or ice, but for love letters, smuggled spices, and even small, very determined cats. Historians still debate whether these accounts are true or simply the kind of stories people tell when a place feels mysterious enough to demand them. You walk deeper, feeling the walls cool under your fingertips. The air grows fresher the further you go, until it's easy to forget there's a sun at all. Somewhere far ahead, the tunnel will lead to another ice house, one of the oldest in the region, where the ice is said to last longer than anywhere else. Your guide says nothing more, and you find you don't mind. In the stillness of the Connaught, the silence itself feels like part of the preservation, keeping not just water and ice, but also the slowness, the patience, and the memory of winter locked safely away beneath the desert. The tunnel opens into a chamber that feels like stepping inside the shadow of a mountain. The ceiling is high enough for your voice to echo if you spoke, though you don't. The air is dense with coolness, almost a texture you could fold into your hands. In the center, a circular pit holds layer upon layer of straw, each covering the glimmering edge of ice blocks, stacked like a frozen library. Your guide walks around the pit slowly, as though circling an altar. This is the winter vault, he says, where the ice is kept for the longest. From here, it can survive until next autumn, if cared for properly. Here's your historical fact. The deepest yachtals could maintain ice for nearly a year by using a combination of insulating materials, underground storage, and strategic ventilation. Openings at the top allowed warm air to escape, while vents at the base drew in the cooler air from quilts or night breezes. It was refrigeration without moving parts, perfected by trial, error, and stubbornness. You notice how the straw here smells faintly sweet, and your guide explains that certain herbs were sometimes mixed in lavender, mint, or even thyme. This wasn't for flavoring but to deter pests and mold. That's your obscure tidbit. An ice house could double as an herbal archive, unintentionally scenting the ice with subtle notes of the desert's own plants. Historians still debate whether the aroma was a happy accident or a deliberate flourish. You sit on a stone bench carved into the wall, feeling the chill soak into your legs. The guide mentions that during the hottest days, some people would come here not for ice, but simply to sit, to breathe, and to remember that the sun wasn't the only ruler of the land. The quiet is deep enough that you almost drift into a doze, the smell of herbs and the low, steady temperature wrapping around you like an old blanket. But your guide taps the floor with his staff, a polite reminder that there's more to see and that no one lives in the winter vault for free. Back in the daylight, the brightness feels harsher after the long, cool dark. The heat presses against your skin like a warm hand that won't move. The guide leads you toward a part of the city where the buildings rise taller and the streets grow quieter. This is the quarter of the wealthier merchantmen and women whose homes are built not just for shade, but for impressing anyone who steps inside. You are led into one such home, where a courtyard opens around a pool of still water. At its center sits a tray of fruit figs, apricots, grapes kept fresh in the shade. Nearby, on a carved stone table, rests a bowl of ice draped with linen. The lady of the house greets you with the calm assurance of someone who can afford to store winter at arm's length. Here's your historical fact. In ancient Persia, access to ice during the summer was as much a status symbol as fine fabrics or imported spices. Hosting guests with chilled drinks or frozen sweets was a mark of wealth and hospitality, signaling both resources and connections. She lifts the linen to reveal a set of small porcelain cups filled with a pale yellow slush, saffron sharbat. The fragrance is intoxicating, and when you sip, it's like swallowing sunlight that somehow learned to be gentle. The lady offers your obscure tidbit in passing. In her family, they keep a single shard of the previous year's ice in the vault all winter long, believing it teaches the new ice to last longer. Whether it's superstition or simply a charming tradition, historians have no consensus, but it's hard not to appreciate the poetry of winter mentoring winter. In the shade of the courtyard, you watch servants bring more ice from a basket, chips melting almost instantly in the warm air. The guests here laugh softly, sip slowly, and seem immune to the heat outside. You can't decide if the ice makes them graceful, or if their grace makes the ice seem colder. The guide catches your eye. We've seen where the ice is born, how it's kept, and how it's enjoyed, he says. Now, you should see how it changes hands. And with that, you step back into the sunlight, where the streets wait with the hum of a market that never quite stops breathing. The market's afternoon rhythm is slower than in the morning, as though the merchants themselves are pacing for endurance. You pass spice sellers fanning themselves behind heaps of saffron, cumin, and dried rose petals, their colors muted in the dusty light. Somewhere nearby, a musician plucks a cedar lazily, each note floating up into the warm air like it has nowhere in particular to be. The guide leads you toward a small square where traders gather to exchange goods in bulk. This isn't the place for single bowls of dessert or a chipped-off sliver of ice. This is where entire blocks change hands, wrapped in straw and marked with small inked symbols denoting the source. The blocks glisten faintly, sweating into their wrappings like shy treasures. Here's your historical fact. In some cities, ice was traded with a regulated pricing system overseen by local officials. It wasn't just a free-fall ice, it was considered a public necessity in summer. And while the wealthy could buy more, certain amounts were reserved for communal use at festivals or for temples. You notice the quiet efficiency of the traders. The exchanges are almost ceremonial inspection of the ice. Brief discussion, agreed price, then a nod before the block is lifted onto a waiting donkey. The sound of melting water dripping into the straw is barely audible but strangely persistent, like a slow clock counting down the lifespan of each block. For your obscure tidbit, one trader mentions, in passing, that the best ice is said to sleep when transported, meaning it melts more slowly if carried at night or in complete shade. Without sudden changes in temperature, he claims his family has wrapped ice in dyed indigo cloth for generations, because they believe the color itself makes the ice rest better. Historians, predictably, have no definitive proof, though the cloth is beautiful enough that you wouldn't blame anyone for using it regardless. As you move on, you notice a boy chasing a runaway straw bundled down the street, his bare feet slapping against the stones. The guide watches him with mild amusement. Every block has a destination, he says. The journey there is negotiable. The guide takes you down a quieter road where the market stalls thin out, and the buildings are spaced farther apart. Here, you find a small workshop with its door wide open to the heat. Inside, two men are carefully carving narrow channels into stone slabs. At first, you mistake them for decorative work, but the guide explains, these are ice trays, designed for freezing and shaping smaller, uniform pieces. Here's your historical fact. Some Persian cities had dedicated facilities for preparing ice in specific shapes, small enough for personal use, large enough for banquet displays. The uniformity made storage easier and allowed for precise portioning during feasts. The men work slowly, dipping their tools into a shallow basin of water between cuts. One of them shows you a finished tray, a shallow stone mold with depressions shaped like pomegranates. Ice poured and frozen in these would come out as tiny, translucent fruit, perfect for floating in And your obscure tidbit, one of the carvers claims smiling just enough for you to doubt him that, in some noble houses, guests were served ice carved into the shapes of mythical animals, the most common being the simurgh, a great bird of Persian legend. Whether this was widespread or just the invention of a particularly theatrical host, historians have not confirmed. The air in the workshop is heavy with dust and the faint tang of wet stone. Outside, a stray dog naps in the thin shadow cast by the doorway, twitching in its sleep as if dreaming of something cooler. As you leave, the guide points toward a tall wall in the distance. Beyond that, he says, is where the ice meets the feast. And there, he adds with the kind of satisfied pause only a storyteller can manage, is where you'll understand why all of this trouble is worth it. You step back into the open sun, feeling its weight settle on your shoulders again, and follow him toward the promise of a table laid for summer's coldest delight. Beyond the wall is a courtyard that feels almost unreal after the dusty streets. Shade cloths are stretched high overhead, filtering the sunlight into a golden haze. A long table runs down the center, draped in embroidered fabric, each place setting marked by a shallow porcelain bowl. Servants move deliberately, carrying trays piled with dishes, their sandals whispering over the cool tiles. At one end of the courtyard, you see the centerpiece, a wide basin filled with ice, shaved into delicate curls that gleam in the filtered light. Bowls of rosewater syrup, pomegranate molasses, and bright green mint leaves surround it like loyal attendants. Guests are arriving in loose, flowing robes, the air carrying a mix of perfume and the faint mineral scent of melting ice. Here's your historical fact. In ancient Persia, the serving of ice-based desserts was often timed to coincide with the hottest part of the day, not just for comfort, but but for spectacle. It demonstrated both the host's resources and their mastery of timing in preserving ice until the moment of serving. A servant hands you a bowl already layered with ice curls, drizzled in saffron syrup so fragrant you almost forget the heat. The texture is impossibly light, like snow pretending to be silk. For your obscure tidbit, a man seated beside you mentions that in his grandmother's village, guests were expected to stir the ice clockwise before eating, to honor the path of the sun. If anyone stirred counterclockwise, they were said to invite summer to linger longer than it should. Historians haven't agreed whether this was truly widespread or just the whim of one particularly bossy elder, but you find yourself stirring clockwise anyway, just in case. The feast moves slowly, the conversation flowing as steadily as the melting ice. You notice how everyone here seems less concerned with eating quickly and more invested in the ritual of cooling down together, as if the dessert itself is simply a vessel for the act of pausing. The guide leans toward you with a sly smile. "This," he says, "is the easiest way to turn heat into loyalty. A man will forget a fine meal, but he will remember the one who gave him winter in July." The feast winds down, the bowls now filled with nothing but pale golden water and the scattered seeds of pomegranates. The air has cooled slightly in the shade, and a faint breeze stirs the edges of the tablecloth. Some guests remain, speaking in low tones. Others drift toward the garden paths, their steps unhurried. Your guide motions for you to follow him once more, this time through a smaller doorway at the far end of the courtyard. You emerge into a private garden where a narrow stream runs over polished stones. Here, in the dappled light beneath fig trees, is a small yakshul built into the earth. It's more modest than the grand ones you've seen in its dome, half hidden by vines. But the air spilling from its doorway is just as cool. Here's your historical fact. Smaller, private ice houses like this were common in the homes of the wealthy, allowing families to store their own supply separate from public or market stores. The principle was the same: thick walls, underground chambers, ventilation, but the scale was intimate. Inside, a single block of ice rests on a raised platform, covered in a linen cloth. Beside it sits a low table with a jug of chilled rosewater and a stack of clay cups. The guide pours you a drink, the condensation immediately beading on the jug's surface. The water is so cold it almost aches as you swallow. For your obscure tidbit, the guide tells you that some families believed the first sip from a newly opened block should be offered to the household cat. This, they said, would ensure the ice remained tame and didn't melt too quickly. Whether this was superstition, a test of safety, or just an excuse to indulge a pampered pet, historians remain divided. You sit for a while in the shaded garden, listening to the trickle of the stream and the occasional rustle of leaves. The guide doesn't rush you. After all, this is the whole point of ice in the desert, not the shock of cold, but the way it slows everything down until even the sun feels like it can wait. When you finally rise, the garden seems to breathe with you, its shadows stretching just a little longer, as though the day itself has been persuaded to pause. By the time you step back into the main streets, the light has softened into the long amber glow of late afternoon. The air is still warm, but no longer urgent-like. The desert has decided it said everything it needed to for the day. You pass the market again, quieter now, the merchants wrapping up their goods. If a few remaining ice sellers pack away their straw baskets, the last faint wisps of cold dissolving into the air. Your guide slows his pace, letting you linger at each corner. You pass the baker from the morning, now seated outside his shop, sipping tea and fanning himself lazily. The smell of bread has been replaced by that of cooling clay. The oven's finally at rest. Somewhere above, swallows arc in and out of the rooftops, their calls sharp against the softened hum of the city. Here's your final historical fact. The methods you've seen, actiles, Q-knots, shaded ice pools, remained in use in Persia for centuries, many lasting into the 20th century before mechanical refrigeration replaced them. The ingenuity wasn't a fleeting novelty. It was a foundation of daily life in a climate that demanded both patience and precision. Your last obscure tidbit drifts casually from the guide as you walk. In some towns, the first ice of the year was sprinkled with a few grains of salt, not to preserve it, but to wake it up after its long sleep underground. Whether this was science misunderstood or poetry practiced, historians can't quite agree. The streets narrow again, returning you to the neighborhood of the first yakshul you saw this morning. The beehive dome is glowing faintly in the evening light, casting its long shadow across the sand. You remember stepping inside it, That first wash of cold against your skin, the smell of straw and clay. You've seen now where that cold is born, where it travels, where it's transformed into something beautiful and fleeting. You stop at the edge of the street. The guide says nothing he doesn't need to. The air is cooling by degrees, the sky shifting toward indigo. Somewhere behind you, a door closes softly. It's still early enough that the sun hasn't decided what kind of day it's going to be. You stand on a veranda in Honolulu. The boards beneath your bare feet cool with the kind of pre-dawn damp that smells faintly of plumeria and salt. The palms sway as if gossiping in slow motion, trading news about the trade ships in the harbor. Somewhere behind you, a rooster is testing out his morning voice. He's confident, but not yet convincing. The air has that warm, soft heaviness that seems to hug the skin, the kind that tells you this day will take its time. You probably won't make it through this day at least, not without surrendering to a nap under some obliging piece of shade. You glance toward the palace, its creamy walls catching the first pink light, and you can almost hear the faint rustle of skirts and the muffled shush of voices inside. It's the 1890s, and the Kingdom of Hawaii is teetering between world's royal traditions in one hand, an impatient tide of foreign businessmen in the other. Inside those walls is Queen Liliuokalani, the last sovereign monarch of Hawaii. Her hands are delicate but strong. The hands of a musician, a writer, and most unexpectedly a quilter. She will one day send secret messages stitched into fabric, a quiet defiance under the guise of needle and thread. But that's not quite yet. For now, she is composing in her head, both songs and strategies. A maid hurries past you with a copper kettle, steam slipping through the spout. She moves with the purposeful silence of someone who knows exactly which corridors creak and which conversations she isn't meant to overhear. There's a strange calm here, even with all that simmering. Honolulu is waking, but it wakes differently than other cities you've known. There are no trams or carriages rattling past in angry hurry, no factory whistles demanding attention. Here, you hear the ocean first, then the birds, then finally the people. Somewhere down the street, a vendor is unstacking pineapples, their sharp sweet scent cutting through the air. You can almost taste the tang of them just by breathing deeply. He greets another man in Hawaiian, and though you don't catch every word, the tone says they are discussing weather, family, and maybe just maybe a rumor about politics. And in that, politics is a storm you can sense, but not yet see. The American sugar planters, the men in stiff collars who sweat more than they admit, are gaining power. The monarchy, once unquestioned, is beginning to look like a beautiful but fragile shell. Historians still debate whether the Queen's decision to compose a new constitution was bold strategy or inevitable misstep. All you know is that, from here, it feels like standing in the moment before a wave rises. A lazy breeze slips past, bringing with it the faint scent of the palace garden's ginger blossoms. You lean against the rail, eyes tracing the path from the harbor to the royal residence. The street is narrow, lined with mango trees that look like they've been holding the same pose for decades, and you wonder, when she sits down to stitch a quilt, will the Queen already know the weight of what's coming? Will she choose her colors like a general chooses ground? Now let's ease into tonight's journey, following the path inside those palace walls. You step through the open doorway into a hall that smells faintly of polished koa wood and sea air. The floor glows in the filtered light, each board a deep reddish brown, so warm you can almost hear it sigh under the soles of your feet. The palace isn't as massive as European ones you've read about, but it doesn't need to be. This is Iolani Palace, and it holds more dignity than size. Its wide windows let the trade winds roam freely, carrying in the soft flutter of palm fronds. You pass a guard in crisp white uniform. He nods politely, though you sense he's memorizing your face. Somewhere deeper in the building, a low melody hums like water over stones. The Queen is at her piano, one of her own compositions. Perhaps Aloha, oh, the farewell song that would circle the globe. She's dressed in black silk, the kind that whispers when she moves, her hair pinned in a style that says both formality and quiet defiance. A servant carries in a folded bundle of fabric, the edges peeking out in bright reds and yellows. You recognize it, a quilt in progress. In the Hawaiian tradition, quilts are not simply for warmth, they're visual poems, each pattern speaking in flowers, leaves, or symbolic shapes. Here's the cultural tidbit you weren't expecting. Hawaiian quilt makers often used a single large symmetrical motif, cut from one piece of cloth and onto a background. The symmetry mirrored the spiritual idea of balance in nature, and, for some, a quiet sense of political order. The queen takes the fabric in her lap, running her fingers along the edge. Her touch is precise, but there's a softness there, too, like she's coaxing the cloth to tell her what it wants to be. She threads her needle with a smooth, practiced motion. You sit nearby, the wicker chair creaking under you, and watch the slow rhythm of her stitching. Each pull of the thread feels deliberate, each knot a small decision. You start to see what historians mean when they suggest these quilts carried more than beauty. They carried messages, color arrangements that hinted at loyalty, motifs that nodded to land rights, patterns that only certain eyes would read. Outside, the vendor you saw earlier passes by again, this time calling out about ripe bananas. The sound slips into the room like an old friend leaning in to tell you something you already know. One of the queen's ladies-in-waiting murmurs something in her ear, and the queen smiles faintly, though her eyes don't leave her work. You wonder if the conversation is about politics, or the latest supply of dyes, or both. In the corner of the room, a map of the islands hangs on the wall. The lines are clean, but the names written. They're Molokai, Kauai, Iwai. I feel older than the paper can hold. You think of the street you walked earlier, the mango trees, the pineapples stacked like watchful sentries. This place is both small and vast at once. A fly wanders lazily through the warm air, and you think about how it has no idea it's in the middle of a royal palace. In its tiny mind, this is just another sunny day with interesting smells. Maybe that's the trick of history to its only grand in retrospect. At the time, it's just another Tuesday. Historians still debate whether the queen's quilts were truly coded messages or simply comforting distractions during her imprisonment years later. The lack of written confession keeps the argument alive. But as you watch her now, with her needle flashing quietly in the light, it's hard not to imagine her sewing more than just fabric. The afternoon leans into the room, filling it with a golden glow that makes the air feel heavier, almost syrupy. The piano sits silent now, as if listening to the hush of the thread pulling through cloth, and you find yourself leaning back, eyelids warm, wondering what story the quilt will tell when it's finished. Who will know how to read it? The day drifts forward without asking your permission, sunlight stretching itself across the palace floors like a lazy cat. You find yourself wandering into the blue room, where the walls are the color of a calm lagoon, soothing, but not so soothing that you'd forget your manners. Velvet chairs, polished to a muted sheen, sit like patient guests, waiting for a conversation to begin. Here, the queen sometimes receives visitors, not just dignitaries in stiff suits, but old friends, musicians, church ladies with opinions sharper than their sewing needles. Today, a small group has gathered, and you're invited to hover quietly on the edge, the way one might hover by a desert table at a wedding, close enough to be involved, far enough to feign innocence. Someone passes around tea, poured from a porcelain pot painted with gold leaves. It's warm, fragrant with hibiscus, and something slightly spicy, cinnamon maybe. The queen takes hers without sugar, and you suspect it's a statement, though you can't quite decide of what. A man with a round, sun-browned face begins talking about land surveys on Maui, his voice rising and falling like ocean swells. Another mentions tariffs, speaking with the pained expression of someone explaining taxes to a child. The queen listens, hands folded neatly, her eyes attentive but distant, like she's reading invisible footnotes in the air. And here comes today's major historical fact, wrapped in conversation. In 1893, just months from now, a group of American and European businessmen supported by US Marines will overthrow her government. They will claim it's to protect order and property, though everyone in this room knows it's about sugar profits. Nobody says it aloud, but the knowledge hums beneath the tea and polite laughter. In one corner, an older woman unrolls a piece of fabric to show the queen a nearly finished quilt, deep blue with a breadfruit design in white. Breadfruit, ulu, is a traditional symbol of growth and abundance in Hawaiian quilting. It's also, in whispers, a reminder of self-sufficiency, of being able to feed your people without bowing to foreign supply chains. You can almost feel the weight of that choice of motif. There's an odd cultural tidbit here. Hawaiian quilters often worked in pairs, one holding the fabric taut while the other stitched. It made the work go faster, but it also turned sewing into conversation, a space where news and secrets could pass more freely than in formal meetings. You watch as the queen's hand rests lightly on the edge of the breadfruit quilt, her thumb tracing the curve of a leaf. A servant opens the windows wider, and the scent of plumeria rushes in, mixing with the faint tang of the harbor. You remember the pineapple vendor from earlier. He's probably still somewhere nearby, moving his cart through the streets. In Honolulu, life is a slow loop of familiar smells and voices. The Queen laughs at something, a genuine, low laugh that feels like the air has been holding its breath for hours. She doesn't laugh often, but when she does, it's like you suddenly remember the ocean is right outside. Historians still debate whether she foresaw the exact timing of her overthrow, or if it took her by surprise. Some accounts claim she believed diplomacy could still hold the tide back. Others think she had already begun sewing her resistance into fabric, preparing for a quieter, longer battle. A breeze flips the corner of a paper on the table, and the Queen reaches out to still it. It's a list, handwritten, in Hawaiian. You don't need to read it to feel its importance. Some things carry their own gravity. You sip your tea, the warmth pooling in your chest, and realize this room's soft blue walls, gentle chatter, fabric folded like secrets isn't just a pretty space. It's a waiting room for history. By late afternoon, the light has turned honey gold, spilling into the corridors like it's paying rent. You follow the sound of quiet footsteps into the Queen's private workroom. It's smaller than the public rooms, less polished, more human. Here, the air smells faintly of fabric dye and camphor, with a shadow of rosewater from an open jar on the shelf. Bolts of cloth are stacked neatly against the wall, red, gold, deep ocean blue, and a shade of green that looks like it was stolen directly from a mango leaf. On the central table, a quilt lies half-finished. The stitch is neat but not hurried. It's the kind of work that refuses to be rushed, as if the cloth itself insists on setting the pace. The Queen sits with her back straight, needle flashing in the soft light. Her spectacles are balanced low on her nose, and every so often she glances over them at a small notebook beside her. You suspect she's not just making patterns, she's making notes. She pauses to adjust the fabric, and you notice the motif taking shape: white hibiscus flowers against a red background. In Hawaiian culture, the hibiscus can mean delicate beauty, but it's also fleeting. The bloom lasts only a day. You wonder if that's a private joke or a warning stitched in silk. Here's a strange tidbit. Some Hawaiian quilts from this era feature patterns of the Hawaiian flag itself, stylized in bold colors. The practice began as a quiet form of patriotism after the overthrow, and displaying the flag openly could invite trouble. Quilts became safe banners, fluttering only in the privacy of one's home. The Queen sets down her needle for a moment and opens the notebook. You can't see the words, but the shape of them, short lines, a rhythm, tells you it's music. She hums softly, the sound threading through the room like another stitch. From somewhere beyond the palace, a conch shell blows, low and resonant, marking the end of the day's fishing. The sound drifts in, mingling with the faint creak of the wicker chair you've claimed as your own. Historians still debate whether the Queen intended every quilt as a political statement, or if some were simply the work of hands seeking peace in a restless time. The truth is probably both. History has a habit of being inconveniently complicated. She resumes her sewing, the needle dipping in and out of the cloth in a steady rhythm. You notice how her fingers move, never hesitating, but never hurried. There's a certain luxury in working at the speed of thought, not the speed of demand. A maid enters quietly, setting down a plate of sliced mango. The Queen thanks her in Hawaiian, the words warm and unhurried. You take a piece, sweet, soft, sun-heavy, and wonder if mango season feels the same now as it did 100 years ago. The last of the sunlight slides across the table, catching on the silver thimble on the Queen's finger. You can almost imagine it as a crown in miniature, small, practical, but still regal. And as the day exhales into evening, you realize this isn't just the story of a queen losing her throne. It's the story of how she refused to lose her voice, even when it spoke in thread and cloth instead of speeches. Evening settles in Honolulu with the kind of unhurried grace that makes you think the whole island might just decide to sleep in tomorrow. The sky shifts from gold to lavender, and the first stars poke through like shy guests at a party, unsure whether they're early or late. Inside the palace, lamps are lit oil, not electric, casting a soft amber glow that clings to the walls. The light moves as people pass, stretching shadows across the koa floors. You find yourself drifting back to the blue room, where the conversation has thinned into the comfortable silence of people who know each other well. The Queen has set aside her sewing for the moment, and now she's at the piano again. This time, she plays something slow, a lull of notes that slide into one another like waves, smoothing the shore. You recognize the cadence. It's the kind of melody that holds farewell in its bones. A lady in waiting pours more tea, though the air is warm enough that the steam rises lazily, reluctant to disappear. The scent of hibiscus mingles with the faint tang of the ocean. Somewhere outside, a minna bird calls once, and then decides it has nothing more to say. Here's your major historical fact for the night. During her imprisonment in 1895, yes, it's coming, the queen was confined to just one upstairs room in this very palace for 8 months. She was allowed only certain visitors, her daily walks in the palace yard under guard, and most notably her sewing. It was during that time she completed some of her most famous quilts. But tonight, that's still in the future. For now, she plays her music and talks quietly with those around her. The mood is light enough that someone cracks a joke about a certain foreign diplomat's insistence on wearing wool suits in the tropics. Everyone chuckles politely. You imagine the diplomat sweating somewhere nearby, convinced he's making a good impression. A servant brings in a folded cloth and lays it across the queen's lap. This one is unusual. Its central motif isn't floral at all, but geometric. Sharp triangles radiate outward from a central diamond. One of the ladies remarks that it reminds her of the ancient petroglyph patterns carved into lava rock. The queen smiles but doesn't comment, letting the suggestion hover unanswered. Cultural tidbit: Hawaiian quilt makers often named their patterns after the plant or symbol depicted, but sometimes the names were deliberately misleading, especially if the quilt carried a hidden message. A pattern called breadfruit might secretly refer to a family crest, a political alliance, or an inside joke known only to a few. The queen's hands rest on the quilt, fingers drumming lightly in time to the music she plays with her other hand. You get the feeling she's working out more than a melody, perhaps a plan, perhaps just a thought that refuses to be hurried into words. Historians still debate whether the palace evenings in those final years were as calm as they seemed from the outside. Some memoirs describe them as peaceful. Others hint at a constant undercurrent of tension, every laugh carrying the weight of what was left unsaid. Outside, the breeze picks up, carrying with it the sultry scent of the harbor. You imagine the pineapple vendor is long gone by now, his cart empty, wheels creaking home. The streets will be quiet, the mango trees heavy with shadows instead of fruit. The queen finishes her piece with a final, soft chord that hangs in the air for a moment too long, as though reluctant to leave. Then she closes the lid of the piano gently, like saying goodnight to an old friend. The palace has its own nighttime voice, a blend of soft footfalls, muted conversation, and the occasional clink of porcelain in the kitchens. You wander through a hallway lined with portraits of past monarchs, their gazes steady and slightly intimidating, as though they know you've been eavesdropping all day. A faint light spills from the queen's workroom. She's there again, not at the piano this time, but bent over the hibiscus quilt. The oil lamp on her desk gives her face a warm glow, though her eyes are sharp and alert. Around her, the room is quieter than before, the air thick with the kind of focus that doesn't invite interruption. She ties off a stitch and reaches for a tin box. Inside are scraps of cloth threads, yellows, greens cut into precise shapes. She holds one up to the light, studying it as though the right piece could unlock a secret. You suspect it just might. Here's your historical fact for this section. Hawaiian quilts were typically made from solid-colored fabrics, a tradition that began after Western contact, when calico and cotton became more available through trade. The bold, symmetrical designs were cut from folded fabric, making a giant snowflake then onto a contrasting background. The technique gave the quilts their striking, almost regal presence. The queen's thimble clicks softly against the needle as she works. You notice she's switched to smaller, tighter stitches, almost invisible unless you're looking closely. These might be nothing more than reinforcement, or they might be her own version of invisible ink. There's a cultural quirk worth noting. In traditional Hawaiian belief, quilts weren't just functional, they were imbued with mana, spiritual power. A quilt given as a gift carried the mana of its maker, a piece of their life woven into the cloth, which means, of course, that if the queen gave a quilt, she was giving far more than fabric. A moth flutters near the lamp, its wings casting momentary shadows across the quilt's red field. The queen glances at it, amused but unbothered. You think about how many moths have passed through history unnoticed, even while brushing past royalty. Historians still debate whether the Queen's use of hibiscus motifs was personal preference or coded statement. Some suggest it was simply a flower she loved. Others see it as a political metaphor, the fleeting bloom mirroring the fragile moment of Hawaiian sovereignty. From outside comes the distant beat of a pahu drum, low and steady, drifting from some gathering beyond the palace gates. It's slow, measured, like a heartbeat that refuses to be rushed. The Queen finishes another section of the quilt and sets it aside, folding it so the center is hidden from view. Then she leans back in her chair, eyes half closed, as though she's listening to something far away, music perhaps, or the future. You stay still, not wanting to break the moment. The lamp flickers once, twice, then steadies, and the quiet returns in full. If you weren't careful, you could fall asleep right here, surrounded by fabric, history, and the soft hum of a queen who refuses to be silent. The night in Honolulu has a way of wrapping itself around you, thick, warm, and just a little too comfortable. You find yourself in the palace courtyard, where the air smells faintly of damp earth and gardenia. The moon is high, spilling silver over the gravel paths and the tops of the ginger plants. You can hear the faint trickle of the fountain in the center, water catching the light in lazy arcs. The Queen is here too, walking slowly along the path. She doesn't speak at first, just lets her hands brush the leaves as she passes. Her pace is measured, the way someone moves when they've been thinking all day and need the night to settle the dust. A lady in waiting trails a few paces behind, the quiet chime of her bracelets just audible over the fountain. Here's tonight's major historical fact. After her overthrow in January 1893, the Queen didn't simply vanish into private life. She fought writing letters to US officials, meeting with supporters, even traveling to Washington, D.C. to plead her case directly. She was calm, diplomatic, and absolutely relentless. But here, under the moon, none of that has happened yet. She's still in the middle of her reign, though the cracks are visible to anyone willing to look closely. She pauses at a bench beneath a breadfruit tree. You remember the breadfruit pattern from earlier, how it stood for self-sufficiency. Maybe she sits here because it's quiet, or maybe she sits here because the symbolism pleases her. Either way, the bench creaks gently as she settles. Cultural tidbit. In Hawaiian tradition, night was a favored time for certain kinds of discussions, genealogies, political alliances, even negotiations. The darkness was believed to soften tempers, making people speak more carefully. You can see how that might be true here. The Queen's voice, when she finally speaks, is low, measured, and without any of the formal stiffness she carries in daylight. She talks to her attendant about the next quilt. This one, she says, will have a design based on the crown flower pua, Kalaunutha blossom, used in royal lei. It's pale lavender, almost white, shaped like a five-pointed star. Monarch butterflies adore it. The Queen says this as though she's letting you in on a secret. Even queens need allies with wings. Historians still debate whether these late-night conversations were casual or calculated. Was she simply choosing flowers, or was she choosing her political symbols one stitch at a time? A cool breeze stirs the breadfruit leaves, and the Queen tilts her head back, watching the branches sway. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barks once, then falls silent. She rises, the silk of her dress whispering over the gravel, and walks back toward the palace. You follow, past the fountain, past the ginger plants, past the shadow of the mango trees that line the street beyond the gates. The moonlight makes the palace windows glow softly, like lanterns waiting to be carried inside. The palace at midnight feels different, less like a seat of government, more like a quiet house with too many rooms to check before bed. The oil lamps are fewer now, their glow pooling in corners, leaving the corridors to dissolve into shadow. You find yourself drawn to the upstairs hall. The air is warmer here, heavy with the lingering scent of camphor from stored quilts. You pass a door left slightly ajar and catch a glimpse inside. Stacks of folded fabric, each wrapped in tissue. The colors peek out: deep crimson, sunflower yellow, ocean blue. The Queen is in a smaller sitting room at the far end, her chair angled toward an open window. She's not sewing now. Instead, she's unfolding an older quilt, one that looks worn at the edges but still vibrant. The central design is a great white kukui leaf on a dark green background. In Hawaiian tradition, the kukui tree is a symbol of enlightenment, its nuts used to make oil for lamps. This quilt is less precise than her current workloose stitches, slightly uneven lines, but she holds it with clear affection. Here's your major historical fact. During her imprisonment, the queen sewed a massive queen's quilt that now resides in the Bishop Museum. It is covered in embroidered signatures, hers, her supporters, and perhaps some meant as coded messages. She traces one seam with her finger, then folds the quilt carefully, setting it aside. The sound of the fabric settling is oddly satisfying, like the soft exhale of a page turning. Cultural tidbit: Hawaiian quilting is traditionally done with a single large but, during times of scarcity, makers would patch together smaller pieces into a mosaic. These crazy quilts could be wildly colorful. Their irregular patterns, a sharp contrast to the formal symmetry of royal designs. They were less common, but more intimate pieces of old garments, baby blankets, even scraps from a wedding dress might appear in the same quilt. The queen glances at the moonlight spilling across the floor and smiles faintly. You get the sense she's thinking of someone far away, perhaps a relative on another island, perhaps an old friend from her youth. Historians still debate whether the queen's late-night quilting was simply a way to pass sleepless hours or a deliberate act of resistance, her way of refusing to be idle in the face of loss. From somewhere below, you hear the slow, methodical sweep of a broom on the palace veranda. The sound is hypnotic, like waves pulling back from the shore. The queen rises, leaving the kukui quilt neatly folded on the chair. She walks toward the hall, her shadow stretching ahead of her in the lamplight. You follow, the boards creaking softly beneath your feet, and the air seems to grow warmer the deeper into the palace you go. Somewhere, a rooster stirs, confused perhaps by the moonlight, and gives a tentative crow. The queen chuckles, just once, before disappearing into her private chambers, leaving you in the hallway with the sound of the sea pressing faintly against the night. The rooster's confused midnight crow fades into silence, and the palace exhales into stillness. You're in the main hall again, the polished koa floor reflecting a thin ribbon of moonlight. Somewhere outside, the palms move in slow rhythm, like they're breathing with the island. The queen's chambers are quiet now, the doors closed, but you can still feel the lingering hum of her presence, like the warmth in a chair long after someone's stood up. You wander toward the rear veranda, where the night air slips in cool and fragrant, bringing hints of ginger blossoms and damp earth. A guard in a white uniform stands at the far end, his cap tilted low. He gives you a small nod, as if to say, "You're fine here, just don't test the boundaries." You stand by the railing, looking out at the faint shimmer of the harbor. Lanterns on a few moored ships sway with the tide, their reflections rippling like strands of gold. Here's tonight's major historical fact. The overthrow in January 1893 was carried out in less than 2 days, with the support of the U.S. Minister to Hawaii and the landing of U.S. Marines. The Committee of Safety declared the monarchy dissolved. The Queen, unwilling to risk bloodshed, yielded under protest, believing the U.S. government would later restore her to the throne. Of course, from where you stand now, in this quiet prelude, there's no sign of that coming storm, only the lazy pulse of the night, the muffled laughter of sailors somewhere beyond the gates, and the creak of the guard shifting his weight. Cultural tidbit: in Hawaiian tradition, the harbor at night wasn't just a place of trade. It was also a place of mo or lolo stories passed between fishermen, travelers, and night watchmen. You imagine the guard here, after his shift, carrying a few choice stories back to his family, editing them for drama or dignity as needed. A light appears in a small window above you. Someone, perhaps the queen herself, is moving about. A shadow passes once, twice, then the light goes out again. You wonder if she's gone back to her sewing, or if she's simply pacing, the way people do when their minds refuse to rest. Historians still debate whether she truly believed the Americans would honor their word. Some accounts say she placed great faith in the idea of fairness. Others argue she knew from the first moment that a protest was only the start of a much longer fight. A cloud drifts across the moon, dimming the harbor until it's little more than a suggestion. You step back from the railing, the boards warm under your bare feet from the day's heat. The night feels endless, but the faintest hint of change is already there somewhere far in the east. The sky is loosening its grip on darkness. You turn toward the palace again, toward the hallways that still smell faintly of camphor and candle smoke, and you follow the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, echoing like stitches in a quilt. Dawn doesn't so much arrive in Honolulu as seep in, like warm water into sand. The first light catches the tops of the mango trees outside the palace gates, painting them in soft gold. Inside, the air is already shifting, the cool of night giving way to the day's inevitable warmth. You find the queen in the breakfast room, seated at a small table with a view of the garden. The room smells faintly of coffee and fresh guava. A basket of bread sits nearby, its cloth cover patterned with red lehua blossoms. She's dressed simply this morning, still elegant, but without the heavy silk. A lighter cotton gown, patterned in pale blue, hangs easily from her shoulders. On the table beside her is the crown flower quilt she mentioned last night. She's already stitched several petals into place, each one pale and precise. Here's your historical fact for the morning. Crown flowers Pua Kalonawa, closely associated with Hawaiian royalty, their shape resembling the points of a crown. Queen Lily Ukulani favored them, often wearing them inlay for formal occasions. In some accounts, she planted them herself in the palace gardens. As she works, a servant brings in a dish of sliced pineapple. The queen thanks him without looking up, her needle moving in an unbroken rhythm. You think of the pineapple vendor from earlier in the story. By now he's probably already restocked. Cart rattling through the streets in the soft light. Cultural tidbit. In Hawaiian quilting tradition, the placement of each piece was done with careful symmetry. The design was often cut from a single piece of folded cloth, then unfolded to reveal its complete shape, much like a paper snowflake. The act of unfolding was considered almost ceremonial, a moment when the quilt spirit was revealed. She pauses to take a sip of coffee, her eyes fixed on the crown flower petals in front of her. You wonder if she's thinking about the design itself, or about the people who might one day see it and understand it in a way others wouldn't. Historians still debate whether her choice of motifs in these final years was meant as overt resistance or simply as an affirmation of identity. Perhaps both. Perhaps the point was that the two were the same. A soft breeze slips through the open window, carrying the scent of plumeria from the garden. The queen breathes it in without pausing her work. Outside, a pair of minnow birds squabble over something you can't see, their voices sharp but brief. The light is growing stronger now, spilling across the table and catching the silver glint of her thimble. She tilts the quilt toward it, inspecting her stitches. Then, without hurry, she begins the next petal. It's the same rhythm as before. Thread in, thread out, cloth shifting gently under her hands. You could almost fall asleep again watching it, except for the quiet certainty that each of those stitches is carrying something forward, something meant to last. By mid-morning, the palace is humming with a gentle sort of activity, the kind that suggests important things are happening, just not urgently. You wander into a sunlit hall where the queen is meeting with two older women, both wearing long hollock dresses in shades of deep green and plum. Their hair is pulled back in neat buns, their hands resting on their laps with the practiced stillness of people who can sit for hours without fidgeting. On the table before them lies another quilt top, still unbound at the edges. The central motif is a massive taro leaf calocut in rich green against a cream background. The queen runs her hand over it, smoothing the fabric as though it were a child's hair. Here's your major historical fact for this section. Taro is more than a plant in Hawaiian culture, it's considered an ancestor. In the creation story, the first taro plant, Aloha, was the elder brother of the first human. To plant, eat, or depict taro is to acknowledge that connection to the land and family. The women begin discussing the placement of the smaller leaf shapes around the center. One suggests crowding them closer. Another insists they need more breathing room. The queen listens, occasionally offering a quiet yes or a yole no. You get the sense these decisions matter far beyond the visual balance. Cultural tidbit. When a Hawaiian quilt was gifted at a wedding or birth, the design was often chosen with an almost prophetic care, meant to carry blessings or advice into the recipient's life. Choosing the wrong plant could be seen as sending the wrong message entirely. A servant slips in to refill the teacups. The queen thanks him without breaking her focus on the quilt, her fingers lightly pinching the fabric into place before handing it to one of the women to baste. Historians still debate whether these quilt-making sessions doubled as political councils. Some memoirs hint that coded discussions about land rights and alliances happened right alongside debates about color combinations. If that's true, then the palace sewing table was as strategic a space as the throne room. From the open window, the sound of the street drifts in hooves on dirt, a child laughing, the faint clatter of a cart over stones. You wonder if the pineapple vendor is making his rounds again. It feels like the sort of day where nothing remarkable will happen, and yet, you can't shake the sense that something always is. The queen stands, smoothing her skirt, and excuses herself with a promise to return after the noon meal. The two women keep sewing, heads bent together, their conversation now too soft to catch. You leave them to it, stepping back into the hallway where the light falls in long, slow-moving patterns across the floor. The midday sun presses down on Honolulu with the soft persistence of a warm hand. Inside the palace, the shutters are half closed, filtering the light into strips and making the air seem cooler than it really is. You drift toward the music room, drawn by the low murmur of a familiar melody. The queen is at the piano again, this time accompanied by a young man with a ukulele. Their playing is casual, almost playful, like a private joke put into song. She stops now and then to correct his timing, but always with a smile. Here's your historical fact for this section. Queen Liliuokalani was a prolific composer. Over 160 songs and chants are credited to her. While Aloha is her most famous, many of her lesser-known works carried subtle political messages, affirmations of Hawaiian identity woven into the lyrics. On the table beside her is the crown flower quilt from breakfast, folded neatly but still within arm's reach. Between songs, she pulls it closer, adding a few stitches before returning to the keys. It's an easy rhythm music, sewing, music again as if each feeds the other. Cultural tidbit. In Hawaiian culture, certain plants and flowers are associated with particular islands or even districts. A lei or quilt featuring a specific bloom could be a way of signaling one's origin or loyalty without saying a word. To the untrained eye, it's just a pretty flower. To those who know, it's a declaration. A lady in waiting enters with a small tray of chilled coconut water, the condensation sliding down the glass. The queen takes a long sip, sets it down, and resumes her playing. Her foot taps lightly on the polished floor, keeping time. Historians still debate whether her lighter songs from this period were meant as pure entertainment or as coded morale boosters for her supporters. Either way, they seem to do their job. The young man with the ukulele laughs more than he plays, missing his cues on purpose just to hear her teasing scold. The air in the room is thick with the kind of afternoon softness that makes you think of hammocks and naps. Even the sunlight seems drowsy, draping itself across the back of the sofa, like it might just settle there for the rest of the day. The queen leans back from the piano, letting her hands rest on her lap. "That's enough for now," she says, though you get the sense she could play all day if she wished. She picks up the quilt again, turning it in her hands to inspect the stitching, her face unreadable in the shifting light. Outside, a mango drops from a tree with a muffled thud. Somewhere, the pineapple vendor's voice carries faintly on the breeze. And inside, the queen threads her needle once more, the quiet punctuated only by the distant rhythm of the sea. The afternoon deepens, the light outside shifting to that warm, syrupy gold that makes the mango leaves glow like they've been brushed with honey. The palace feels slower now, its footsteps fewer, its conversations quieter. You find yourself once more in the queen's workroom, where the crown flower quilt has been set aside, and a new project lies across the table. This one is bolder deep red against pure white, the pattern unmistakably the Hawaiian flag. The stripes are stylized into broad curving shapes, the Union Jack in one corner reimagined as a cluster of geometric blossoms. It's patriotic and unmistakable, and yet if folded just so it could be mistaken for a floral design. Here's your major historical fact. After the overthrow, open displays of the Hawaiian flag became politically charged, even risky. Quilts like this allowed loyalists to keep the flag in their homes without drawing too much unwanted attention. The queen traces one red stripe with her finger, then begins stitching at the very edge, the needle dipping in and out in perfect rhythm. There's no one else in the room, save for you and the soft buzz of a fly at the far window. The air smells faintly of starch and cotton, the clean scent of new fabric. Cultural tidbit. Many Hawaiian quilt makers believed that to cut a design from multiple pieces rather than one continuous shape was bad luck. It broke the spirit of the pattern, which means a quilt like this, with its bold and unbroken flag motif, is as much a statement of craftsmanship as it is of loyalty. Outside, you can hear the faint shouts of children playing somewhere near the street. Their voices rise and fall like the tide, joyful, chaotic, entirely unaware of the political undercurrents running just beyond their games. Historians still debate whether quilts like these were truly intended as coded resistance or simply as quiet acts of remembrance. Perhaps the difference didn't matter. Perhaps keeping the image alive was resistance enough. The queen ties off her thread and snips it clean. She leans back, looking at the quilt as though trying to see it through someone else's eyes. The lamplight catches the silver in her hair, turning it into a faint halo. She folds the quilt carefully, tucks it into a wicker basket, and covers it with a plain cloth. To anyone passing by, it's just another piece of sewing. But you know better. Evening comes quickly in Honolulu, as if the sun simply decides it's done for the day. The sky is streaked with pink and coral, the harbor turning the color of molten bronze. From the palace veranda, you can see the first lanterns flicker to life in the streets below. The queen is on the veranda too, seated in a wicker chair with the breadfruit quilt in her lap. She's not sewing this time, just holding it, as though feeling its weight in her hands is enough. The air around her hums with quiet. Even the birds seem to have agreed to end their chatter early. Here's your historical fact. The breadfruit motif was one of the earliest and most enduring patterns in Hawaiian quilting. Introduced in the mid-1800s and often associated with prosperity and sustenance. For a queen whose reign was under threat, displaying it could be as much about asserting stability as it was about tradition. She looks out toward the harbor, where a ship is anchored further out than the others. Its lights blink faintly, the only movement in an otherwise still scene. You can't tell if she's watching it with interest or ignoring it entirely. Cultural tidbit: Hawaiian quilters sometimes incorporated ghost stitching, quilting patterns that didn't follow the visible but instead traced unseen shapes into the background. These could be personal symbols, prayers, or even jokes only the maker understood. You wonder how many of the queen's quilts carry these invisible layers, whispering stories that can only be read by touch. A lady-in-waiting brings her a shawl, though the air is still warm. The queen accepts it with a nod, drapes it loosely over her shoulders, and resumes her slow study of the quilt in her lap. Historians still debate whether she saw these evenings as moments of peace or as rehearsals for resilience. Was she resting, or was she practicing the art of stillness in the face of change? The light fades until the harbor is only a suggestion, the lanterns on the streets below glowing like fireflies. Somewhere nearby, the pineapple vendor is almost certainly asleep, his cart resting quietly in the dark. The queen folds the breadfruit quilt and rises, moving slowly back inside. The veranda is empty now, save for the wicker chair, which sways once in the breeze before becoming still again. The night gathers itself around the palace, and the sound of the sea presses closer, steady and sure, as if to remind you that it has outlasted far greater storms. Night holds the palace gently, the way a quilt holds the warmth of its maker. The lamps burn low now, their light no longer sharp, but softened into pools that reach only a few steps across the koa floor. Somewhere deep in the building, a clock chimes slow, deliberate, as though it too is in no hurry to move the hours forward. The queen is alone in her workroom, a single oil lamp casting its circle of gold over her latest quilt. It is nearly finished, a crown flower design, petals unfolding in pale lavender across a deep red field. Her fingers move slowly, not from hesitation, but from a quiet pleasure in the final stitches. Here's your last major historical fact. When she was imprisoned in 1895, the queen completed a large signature-covered quilt, now called the Queen's Quilt. It remains both an artifact and a mystery. Its stitched names and dates, carrying meanings historians still try to decode. Cultural tidbit: it was said that a Hawaiian quilt should never be sold, only given as a gift. Selling one was believed to strip it of its mana, its spiritual power, which means the queen's quilts, kept or gifted, would always have carried the strength of her hands and the intentions sewn into them. The palace is nearly silent now, save for the faint swish of fabric under her fingers. The air is warm but not heavy, perfumed with the last drift of plumeria from the garden. Outside, the harbor lies dark and still, the tide whispering against the shore in long, even breaths. Historians still debate whether the queen knew her monarchy would never be restored, but as she ties the final knot, there is no sign of defeat in her movements, only care, and a strange, deep patience. She folds the quilt slowly, smoothing each layer before setting it aside. The lamplight catches her profile, calm, composed, touched by a quiet defiance. She leans back in her chair, eyes half closed, listening not to music, not to conversation, but to the steady rhythm of the sea beyond the palace walls. And now, we'll let the story rest, the way she lets the quilt rest, finished for now, but still holding warmth for whoever might touch it next.